Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back, way back, to a time that's been romanticized in shows and video games, but was, in reality, probably one of the most uncomfortable periods to be alive. We're heading to the Viking Age, and tonight, you're not just going to learn about it, you're going to be dropped right into the middle of it. A small heads up based on the realities of the 9th century. Your modern sensibilities might not get you through the first day, but that's the fun of it, isn't it? Experiencing it from the safety of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly helps this channel grow. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below and let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you register isn't a sight or a sound. It's a feeling, a deep, penetrating cold that seems to be coming up from the very ground beneath you. You're lying on something hard, a wooden plank, maybe, and the single blanket covering you is coarse, scratchy, and surprisingly heavy. It smells faintly of lanolin, that greasy scent of sheep's wool, but it's mixed with something else, something smoky. You try to pull the wool tighter around your shoulders, but the cold still seeps in. You decide to open your eyes, but it doesn't help much. The world is a canvas of deep browns and blacks, painted in shadow. There's a single, weak source of light somewhere in the distance, a dull orange amber glow that does more to create moving shadows than it does to illuminate. As your eyes slowly, painfully adjust, the shape of the world begins to form around you. You're indoors, but the space is vast, cavernous. The ceiling is high above you, lost in darkness, but you can make out the vague shape of massive wooden beams arching over your head like the ribs of a great beast. You're in what the Norse would call a longhouse, a longhouse, and it is, as the name suggests, very, very long. You try to sit up, and the scratchy wool blanket falls away. The air that hits your skin is frigid, but that's not what takes your breath away. It's the smell. Oh, the smell. It's a complex, layered assault on your nostrils. The base note is old, stale wood smoke, clinging to every surface. On top of that is the pungent, earthy aroma of unwashed bodies, a lot of them. Woven into that is the faint, sour tang of spilled ale, the oily scent of some long since eaten boiled fish, and something else, something deeply organic and farm-like. You look to your left, then to your right. You're not in a bed. You're on a wide, raised wooden platform that runs the length of the wall. And you are not alone. Lined up like sardines in a can are bodies. Dozens of them. Men with thick beards, women with long, braided hair, and small children curled up between them, all huddled together under a chaotic mess of wool blankets and animal furs. There are no walls, no partitions, no curtains. Your concept of a private bedroom has just evaporated into the smoky air. This is it. This is home. For everyone. An entire extended family. Maybe 20 or 30 people. Sharing one single, open space. The gentle, rhythmic sound you hear isn't just one person's, nor it's a whole choir of them. A symphony of slumber. As you sit there, taking in the scene of communal living, you hear a soft shuffle from the far end of the longhouse, followed by a low, guttural snort. You peer into the gloom and see them. The source of that farm-like smell, livestock. A handful of sheep and maybe a cow are standing quietly in a sectioned-off area at the end of the building. In the brutal Scandinavian winter, bringing your most valuable assets, your animals, inside was just a matter of protecting them from the cold and from predators. Their collective body heat helped to warm the entire longhouse, a kind of living, breathing, and very smelly central heating system. This single-room living arrangement is one of the most well-documented facts about Viking society. The longhouse was the heart of the homestead, the center of family life. work, and celebration, but the specifics are still fuzzy. Archaeologists and historians still debate the exact internal layouts. For instance, that partition separating you from the livestock, was it a standard feature or a luxury of a wealthier family? Some excavations suggest that in poorer households, the line between the human and animal living quarters was blurry at best, sometimes non-existent. The idea of waking up a few feet from a cow might seem bizarre, but here, it's just Tuesday. You look up, directly above the center of the hall, where the embers of the central hearth glow. You can see a small, dark square against the slightly less dark sky. A smoke hole. It's the only form of ventilation. This central fire pit, or longhouse, was the home's engine. It provided all the heat, all the light for the evening, and it's where all the food was cooked. It was the social hub, but it came at a cost. With the fire constantly smoldering, the air inside was permanently thick with smoke. Modern analysis of skeletal remains from the period shows evidence of lung damage consistent with a lifetime of smoke inhalation. Breathing freely was a luxury reserved for the outdoors. For now, though, the fire is low. The day hasn't begun, but as you sit there, shivering in the cold, dusty, smoky air, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of strangers and their farm animals, one thought cuts through the confusion. The epic, heroic Viking Age you imagined is a world away from this gritty, cramped, and profoundly uncomfortable reality. And you haven't even had breakfast yet. The world begins to stir not with an alarm clock, but with a series of coughs. They dry, hacking sound echoes in the cavernous space as lungs, irritated by a night of sleeping and smoke, protest the morning air. Thy woman with hair the color of straw, braided so tightly it seems to pull at her ankles, rises from her spot near the central hearth. She moves with a practiced economy, her feet silent on the hard-packed earth floor with a wooden poker. She nudges the glowing embers back to life, skillfully adding small, dry wigs until a weak flame flickers, casting dancing shadows on the timber walls. This is the HUS Freja, the mistress of the house, and her day started before anyone else's. As the fire grows, so does the activity. People begin to sit up, stretching with groans that are swallowed by the vastness of the longhouse. There's a low murmur of conversation, voices thick with sleep. The children are roused, not with gentle nudges, but with a firm shake of the shoulder. There is work to be done. There is always work to be done. Your stomach crumbles, a hollow ache that reminds you of the deep chill in your bones. You're hoping for something hot, something savory, maybe some sizzling bacon fried eggs. Forget about it. Your breakfast expectations are about to be brutally recalibrated. The woman at the hearth hangs a large, blackened iron cauldron over the growing flames. Another person, a young boy, brings her a leather bucket of water. Sloshing some onto the dirt floor, she pours it in, and soon a plume of steam joins the smoke, making the air even thicker. Then, she looks over in your direction, or rather, at a large, flat stone with a smaller, rounded stone resting on top of it. Sitting near the wall is a quern stone, a simple hand mill for grinding grain, and it seems that's your job. Someone hands you a sack filled with hard, dry grains. It could be oats, or maybe barley. You're instructed to pour a handful onto the base stone and begin grinding. You kneel, gripping the top stone, and begin to turn it. It's heavy, awkward. The grating sound of stone on stone is jarring in the quiet morning. Your back complains, your shoulders burn, and after 5 minutes, you've produced a pitifully small amount of coarse flour. You look at the 30 or so hungry faces now watching you with mild impatience. Grinding enough for this entire household will take ages. It's a slow, grueling task, and it's the necessary first step for almost every meal. Eventually, someone takes pity on you and a rotation is established. The coarse ground meal is collected in a wooden bowl and handed to the HUS Freja. She unceremoniously dumps it into the cauldron of boiling water. stirring with a long wooden paddle. There's no measuring, no recipe, just intuition born from a lifetime of making the same meal, day in, day out. After what feels like an eternity of simmering, breakfast is served. You're handed a rough-hewn wooden bowl and a spoon carved from bone. A ladle of the hot mixture is plopped into it. It's a thick, grayish, unappetizing paste. This is grouty or porridge. There is no sugar, no cinnamon, no berries picked fresh from the garden. It is, in its purest form, boiled grain. You take a tentative spoonful. The taste is, well, it's not really a taste. It's a texture, gritty, a little lumpy, with a faint smoky flavor from the fire it was cooked over. It's warm, and it's filling. That is its sole purpose. It's fuel. But wait, there are a few accompaniments. A large, round, flat loaf of bread is passed around. It's a dark, dense rye bread, hard as a rock. You break off a piece, and your jaw gets a decent workout just chewing it. It's best used for dipping into the porridge, to make it go a bit further. There's also another bowl on the bench, containing a thick, white substance, and looks a bit like Greek yogurt. This is skyar, a staple of the Norse diet. It's not the sweet, creamy dessert you might buy today. It's a type of fresh cheese, made from skimmed milk. You add a dollop to your porridge. It has a sharp, tangy, slightly sour kick that actually cuts through the blandness of the grain. It's a welcome burst of flavor and a huge hit of protein. Some people might even have a small piece of salted butter, a true luxury, to stir into their bowl, but that's a sign of a wealthy household. This simple, monotonous meal is what historians call the dagmal, the day meal. But here's something scholars are still debating: how many meals did the Vikings actually eat? The sagas, the epic stories written down hundreds of years later, often mention two main meals: the dagmal in the morning and the natmal, or night meal, in the evening. This two-meal system makes sense for a farming society, especially in the summer with its long working days. However, archaeological evidence, like cooking pits and food remains, sometimes suggests a midday meal might have been common, at least for those doing heavy labor. The reality was likely flexible, changing with the seasons and a person's status and occupation. You finish your bowl of smoky porridge and tangy sky are the dense bread sitting heavy in your stomach. You feel full, but not satisfied. There was no joy in that meal, only function. As you look around, you see everyone is already done. Bowls are being wiped clean with bread or a finger. There's no lingering over coffee. People are standing up, grabbing tools, and heading for the large wooden door. The fuel has been delivered. Now, the workday begins, and you have a sinking feeling you're not going to like your job description. Now that you're fueled up on grayish mush, it's time to get dressed for the day. You look down at what you're wearing, probably some simple linen undergarment. You woke up and realize it's not going to cut it. The cold from the earth floor is already seeping into your feet, and a draft from the heavy wooden door sends a shiver up your spine. You need your outfit of the day, your OOTD, and just like breakfast, it's going to be a lesson in practicality over comfort. You're pointed towards a wooden chest at the foot of your sleeping platform. Lifting the heavy lid, you're met with a collection of folded textiles. The colors are surprisingly not all brown and gray. You see muted shades of blue, a dull red, a mossy green, and a faded yellow. These colors weren't bought in a store. They were painstakingly created from plants. Not a root for red, wood for blue, weld for yellow. Dyeing was a complex and time-consuming process, making colored clothing a sign of status. The brighter and richer the color, the more expensive it was, a subtle way of showing off your wealth. You pull out the first layer, a pair of trousers. They aren't the sleek, fitted leather pants you see in movies. They're baggy, almost like pajama bottoms, made of a coarse, brownish wool. They're designed for movement, not for fashion. As you pull them on, you immediately feel the itch. This isn't merino or cashmere. This is old school, unprocessed sheep's wool. It's scratchy, it's prickly, and you have a feeling it's going to chafe in all the wrong places. But it's also incredibly effective at trapping heat, even when it gets damp. In this climate, that's a trade-off you have to accept. Next comes the tunic, the KY or till. It's a simple T-shaped garment that you pull over your head. It might be made of a slightly softer wool, or if you're lucky, linen. It's long, reaching down to your knees, and held in place at the waist by a leather belt. This belt is the Viking equivalent of a pocket. From it, you'll hang everything you need for the day: a small knife for eating on general tasks, a pouch for carrying small items, maybe a whetstone for sharpening your tools. If you're a woman, your outfit is slightly different. Instead of trousers, you start with a long linen underdress. Over that, you wear a woolen tunic-like garment called a smoky or hanger OK. It's essentially a tube of fabric, held up by two straps that go over your shoulders and are fastened at the front with large, ornate brooches. These brooches are not just decorative, they are a key part of the outfit's construction and a major display of a woman's wealth and social standing. From these brooches, she might hang chains carrying useful items like keys, a small pair of scissors, or a decorated case for needles. The keys, in particular, were a powerful symbol, showing that she was the mistress of the household, in charge of all its valuables locked in chests. Now for the footwear. Forget about sturdy boots with good arch support. You're handed a pair of simple shoes made from a single piece of leather, folded around your foot and stitched at the heel and toe. They look a bit like soft ballet flats or moccasins. They are fastened with a leather thong that you wrap around your ankle. They offer minimal protection from sharp rocks and will be soaked through the moment you step in a puddle. You stuff some dried grass or moss inside for a bit of extra insulation and cushioning, a primitive and slightly squishy version of an insole. Finally, the most important piece for the outdoors, the cloak. It's a large, heavy rectangle of thick, oily wool. It's fastened at one shoulder with a simple pin or a more elaborate brooch, leaving your dominant arm free for work. This is your all-purpose outerwear. It's your raincoat, your windbreaker, and an extra blanket if you get caught outside at night. It smells strongly of sheep and wood smoke, a century beginning to associate with survival. As you stand there, fully dressed in your itchy, bulky, and slightly smelly new clothes, you might be wondering about one iconic item. Where's the helmet specifically? The helmet with the horns. The answer is simple: it doesn't exist. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about Vikings. Not a single historical helmet with horns has ever been found from the Viking Age. It was a romantic invention of 19th century artists and costume designers, likely for Wagnerian operas. Imagine trying to fight in a close-packed, shield wall with giant horns sticking out of your helmet. You'd be a danger to your own comrades, constantly snagging on their shields and weapons. Real Viking helmets, for those who could even afford them, were simple, functional skullcaps of iron or leather, sometimes with a nose guard. Most warriors likely fought with no helmet at all, just their thick hair and thicker skulls for protection. The academic world is still trying to piece together the full Viking wardrobe, and some details remain elusive. One area of ongoing debate is undergarments. While linen undertunics are well attested for both men and women, what about, well, underwear? There's very little direct archaeological evidence for Viking Age briefs or loincloths. Some textual sources from outside Scandinavia mock the Norse for being overdressed, which might imply multiple layers, but concrete proof is hard to come by. Did they wear them or did they just go au natural under those baggy trousers? It's a surprisingly intimate question that history hasn't quite answered yet. Dressed and ready, you feel weighed down. The wool is heavy, the cloak is cumbersome, and every movement is a conscious effort. You look around at the others, who move with an unbothered ease. This is their normal. For you, it's a constant, scratchy reminder that you are a long way from home. You follow the stream of people heading out the door, into the pale morning light, ready to face whatever task awaits you. The cold air hits you, and for a moment, very grateful for the itchy wool. You step out of the dim, smoky longhouse and into the morning. The air is crisp, clean, and shockingly cold. It's a welcome relief after the stuffy interior. But the biting wind quickly reminds you why that smoky shelter is so essential. You're standing in a small clearing, surrounded by a handful of other building smaller turf-roofed huts for storage. A smithy with a blackened entrance, and a pen for animals. This is your world, a small farmstead or bewire, carved out of the rugged Scandinavian landscape. You look around for the long ships, for the hardened warriors sharpening their axes, preparing for a raid. You see none of that. Instead, you see a group of men picking up tools, not swords and axes, but scythes, hoes, and wooden plows. You see women heading towards the animal pens with buckets, or towards a stream with bundles of laundry. The epic Viking adventure you were expecting is suddenly looking a lot like a day of hard labor on a remote, off-the-grid farm. This is the fundamental truth that often gets lost in the sagas of raiding and exploration. The vast majority of Norse people, upwards of 90%, were not globe-trotting Vikings. They were farmers. Their lives were dictated not by the call of the sea, but by the rhythm of the seasons. Their greatest battles were not against Saxon shield walls, but against rocky soil, early frosts, and livestock diseases. The entire, dazzling Viking Age, with its far-flung trade routes and violent raids, was built on a foundation of surplus grain and livestock. It was the success of these farms that freed up a small percentage of the population to go out and do the things we now call Viking. Someone shoves a wooden rake into your hands and points towards a field. Your job for the day, and for most days, has begun. You trudge towards the patch of earth, your flimsy leather shoes immediately getting damp from the dew-covered grass. The field isn't a neat, sprawling expanse of green you might imagine. It's a small, irregularly shaped plot, littered with stones that had to be cleared by hand. The soil is dark and heavy. If it's spring, your day will be filled with back-breaking work. You'll be part of a team guiding a simple plow, cold and hard, through the soil. And like a modern plow that turns the soil over, the hard just scratches a furrow in it. You'll have to go over the field multiple times in a crisscross pattern to prepare it for seeding. The plow is pulled by a pair of oxen, or if the family is poor, maybe just the men themselves. Your job is to walk behind, breaking up clumps of earth, pulling out rocks, and preparing for the sowing of seeds, barley, oats, rye, and a few hardy vegetables like peas and cabbages. If it's summer, your day is even longer. Thanks to the near-endless daylight of the north, you'll be bent over, weeding the fields by hand, or tending to the precious hay meadows. Hay was a critical crop, not for humans, but as winter fodder for the livestock. A poor hay harvest could mean a family would have to slaughter their precious animals before winter, a decision that could lead to starvation. By spring, you might also be tasked with cutting peat from a nearby bog. These dried blocks of earth were a vital source of fuel, second only to wood, through the long, dark winter. If it's autumn, it's all hands on deck for the harvest. You'll be using a sickle, a small, curved blade, to cut the stalks of grain, bundling them into sheaves. It's repetitive, painful work that leaves your back screaming and your hands raw. This harvest is the culmination of the entire year's effort. Every single grain is precious. And this work isn't just for the men. Women and older children are integral to every step. While men might do the heavy plowing, women were responsible for the kitchen gardens, for milking the animals, for churning butter and making cheese, for foraging for berries and nuts in the woods, and for the monumental task of processing wool and flax into thread and then weaving it into cloth. A child's job might be to scare birds away from the crops or to watch over the grazing sheep. Everyone had a role. No one was idle. Here's a small detail you wouldn't think about: fertilizer. With no chemical fertilizers, farmers had to be resourceful. They used animal manure from the longhouse and pens, but they also used something called sea wrack. If you lived near the coast, a common ask would be to go down to the shore and gather heaps of seaweed to spread on the fields. It was rich in nitrogen and other minerals, an excellent natural fertilizer. So add the smell of rotting seaweed to your growing list of Viking Age aromas. Historians are still debating the efficiency and scale of these farms. While we know the general crops and methods, the exact yield is a major point of discussion. How much surplus could an average farm really produce? Was it enough to reliably support an unfarming warrior class? Or was the line blurrier? With most Vikings being farmers who just went on a raid during the off-season, the answer likely varies hugely by region. A wealthy farm in the fertile lands of Denmark was a world away from a hard-scrabble existence in the rocky fjords of Norway or the volcanic soil of Iceland. As you stand in the field, raking stones or pulling weeds under a pale, indifferent sun, the reality sinks in. There is no glory here. There is no adventure. There is only the endless, repetitive cycle of work needed to coax a living from the unforgiving earth. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know you had. The epic tales of Valhalla feel very far away when your most immediate concern is a blister forming on your palm and the gnawing anticipation of another bowl of grey porridge for your evening meal. After a long morning of what feels like manual labor punishment, a horn blows from the direction of the longhouse, signaling a break. Your back is a single, solid knot of pain, and your hands are reed and drawl. You trudge back from the fields, joining the slow procession of other workers. You're not just tired, you're starting to understand the sheer physical exhaustion that was the background noise of everyday life. As you approach the cluster of buildings, you see that not everyone was in the fields. A man is carefully examining the hoof of a rather large and uncooperative-looking cow, speaking to it in a low, soothing tone. Another is mending a section of a wattle fence that keeps the sheep from wandering into the vegetable patch. The animals aren't just background decoration, they are the families walking, breathing bank account. This is your introduction to your neighbors, both human and animal. In this small, isolated community, the line between the two is often blurred. The value of a person was tied to their land, but the value of that land was measured in the livestock it could support. A cow was a source of milk, cheese, and butter. It could pull a plow. Its hide could be turned into leather, its bones into tools. A new calf was a cause for celebration. The death of a cow could be a devastating economic blow, far more impactful than a distant cousin passing away. These animals were so important that they were often given names and treated almost like members of the family. You might know your neighbor's cow, swallow, better than you know your neighbor's third child. This deep connection to livestock is woven into the very fabric of Norse society, including their laws. One of the most fascinating things about Viking Age law, which was memorized and recited by a law speaker at the local assembly, was its incredible specificity regarding animals. There were laws detailing the proper compensation if your pig wandered into your neighbor's field and ate his crops. There were rules for what to do if your dog bit someone. There were even regulations about bees. If your neighbor's swarm of bees flew onto your land and settled, the law dictated how the honey in the new hive should be divided. It was a legal system built for a society where a cow getting loose was a major community incident. Now, about your human neighbors. In this small farmstead, you probably live with your entire extended family. But a few hundred meters away, through a patch of woods, is another farmstead, and beyond that, another. This scattered community is held together by a web of kinship, friendship, and rivalry. There are no secrets here. Everyone knows who is feuding with whom, whose son is trying to court whose daughter, and who had a better barley harvest last year. Reputation is everything. A person's honor, or drengi TPR, was their most valuable possession, and it had to be publicly maintained. If your neighbor felt you had insulted him, perhaps you accused him of being lazy. or you simply looked at him the wrong way, he couldn't just post an angry comment online. He would have to seek public restitution. This might involve a formal challenge, a demand for compensation, or even a violent confrontation. The sagas are filled with stories that start with a minor slight dispute over a piece of driftwood on the beach or an argument about a grazing boundary that escalates over generations into a bloody, multi-family feud. Your modern instinct to mind your own business doesn't quite work here. Your business is everyone's business. Here's a peculiar little custom that highlights this lack of privacy: the door shame. If you wanted to legally separate from your spouse, one method described in the Icelandic sagas involved the wife publicly declaring the separation. She had to do it first at their bed, then at the main doorway of the longhouse, and finally at the local public assembly. It was a ritual designed to make a private matter a public record, ensuring the entire community was a witness. The idea of quietly signing papers in a lawyer's office is an unimaginable future luxury. Historians and archaeologists are still trying to map out the precise social structure of these farming communities. The sagas, our main textual source, were written down by Christian scholars in the 13th century, hundreds of years after the events they describe. They tend to focus on the lives of chieftains, kings, and famous warriors, not the everyday farmer. So, one of the big questions they grapple with is how much of the drama, honor feuding, and legal wrangling described in the sagas was a reality for the common person. Was every farmer obsessed with their reputation, or were they more concerned with just getting through the winter? It's likely that the sagas dramatize and elevate these concepts of honor, but the underlying principle that, in a small, interdependent community, your public standing was critically important was very real. You take a seat on a log, watching the man who is now gently rubbing the cow's neck. Your neighbor. You know that his well-being is tied to yours. If his harvest fails, the community might have to support him. If his fence breaks, his sheep might eat your cabbages. If you offend him, you might find yourself in a very public and very serious dispute. It's a society held together not by abstract laws from a distant king, but by a fragile, ever-present, and deeply personal network of social pressure. You realize that surviving here isn't just about physical strength. It's about navigating a complex social minefield where a single misstep could have consequences for your entire family. As you sit there, catching your breath and trying to subtly massage your aching back, you watch the HUS Freja, the woman who woke first and started the fire, directing the midday activities. She isn't shouting orders, but people seem to naturally orbit around her. A young girl shows her a basket of foraged mushrooms for approval. Eamon asks her a question about which grain sack to use for the animal's feed. She moves with an air of quiet, indisputable authority. If you are inhabiting a female body on this journey, this is the role you would aspire to. It's a position of immense power, but it comes with a crushing weight of responsibility. The romanticized image of the shield maiden, a woman fighting alongside men, captures the imagination. But the historical reality for most Norse women was centered on the homestead, and the queen of this domain was the mistress of the house. Her power wasn't delegated to her by her husband, it was inherent to her role. The Norse household was seen as a partnership. The husband was in charge of the outdoors, the fields, the hunting, the politics, the raiding. The wife was in charge of the indoors, everything that happened within the confines of the longhouse and its immediate surroundings. And indoors was a vast and complex enterprise. She was the household CEO. She managed the food supplies, calculating precisely how much of the harvest could be eaten now and how much had to be preserved to last through the long, dark winter. This involved a deep knowledge of salting, drying, smoking, and fermenting. A miscalculation could mean starvation. She managed the production of textiles, a process that took up a huge amount of time. From shearing the sheep to spinning the wool into thread and then weaving that thread into cloth on a large, the trite loom. The entire chain of production was under her control. The family's clothing, The sails for their ships, it all came from her domain. Her symbol of office was a set of keys, which she would often wear visibly, hanging from the brooches on her dress. These weren't just symbolic. They were the actual keys to the locked wooden chests that held the family's most precious valuables: a few pieces of silver, a rare glass bead, imported spices, or fine fabrics. Her husband might bring the wealth into the house, but she was the one who guarded it. The sagas tell stories of men who had to formally ask their wives for permission to access these chests. In a society with no banks, she was the banker. This indoor power extended to legal matters as well. While men were the public face of the family at the thing, or local assembly, women had legal rights that were quite progressive for the time. They could inherit property, and a woman's dowry remained her personal property throughout the marriage. Most importantly, she had the right to divorce her husband. The grounds for divorce could be physical abuse, but also, interestingly, if the husband failed to be a good provider, or even if he wore clothing deemed too feminine. If she chose to divorce, she could take her dowry and any property she brought into the marriage with her, and return to her own family. She was not trapped. Of course, this power came at a price. The life of the HUS Freyja was one of relentless work. From dawn until dusk, she was overseeing a dozen critical tasks at once, and her life was also fraught with danger. Childbirth, in an era without modern medicine, was a life-threatening event for both mother and child. We know from skeletal remains that many women died young. Here's a small, intimate detail of a woman's life: personal grooming. Excavations of female graves have found not just ornate brooches and beads, but also tweezers, or spoons, small scoops for cleaning earwax, and beautifully carved combs. These weren't just for vanity. In a crowded longhouse, staying clean was a way to combat lice and other parasites. Combing hair was a daily ritual, and the intricate bone and antler combs were prized personal possessions. The debate among historians often centers on the interpretation of this female power. How deep did it really run? The sagas, written by men, naturally focus on male exploits, but reading between the lines, we see powerful female characters who instigate feuds, advise their husbands on political matters, and wield enormous influence from behind the scenes. They are often portrayed as the go-getters, pushing their husbands and sons to uphold the family honor. Some scholars argue this is evidence of their agency and power. Others suggest it was one of the few avenues of influence open to them in a patriarchal society, a way to exert power indirectly. The true nature of the gender power dynamic likely varied from household to household, but it was far more nuanced than a simple system of male domination. You watch the HUS Freyja as she inspects a newly woven piece of cloth, her fingers expertly checking for flaws. She is not a warrior. She will likely never see a foreign shore, but her strength, her foresight, and her endless labor are the bedrock upon which this entire society is built. Without her, the fields would be useless, the wealth would be squandered, and the longhouse would be just a cold, empty shell. The Viking raider gets the glory, but the HUS Freyja is the one who keeps the world turning. The afternoon sun is beginning to dip, but the workday isn't over. A man from a neighboring farmstead arrives, his face grim. He doesn't come to the longhouse door, but speaks to the head of your household in a low, urgent tone. There's been a dispute. A boundary stone between two properties has been moved, and accusations are flying. This isn't something that can be solved with a fist fight. It's a matter for the community. And so, you learn your I'll go into the thing. Don't get your hopes up. This isn't a grand, parliamentary affair in a stone hall. The local thing was an open-air assembly, usually held at a traditional, ancestral meeting place, a large mound, a prominent group of trees, or a field that was considered neutral ground. All freemen of the area were expected to attend. It was their right and their duty. You grab your heavy wool cloak, as the evenings are always cold, and join the small group of men from your farm walking towards the meeting place. As you arrive, You see dozens, maybe even 100, other men gathering. They're standing in groups, talking, leaning on their spears which they brought more out of habit than aggression. The atmosphere is a mix of a town hall meeting, a county fair, and a courtroom drama. People are catching up on news, trading gossip, and sizing each other up. This is the heart of Norse political and social life. This is where the community governed itself. The thing served multiple purposes. It was a legislature where new laws were adopted, or old ones affirmed. It was a court where disputes were settled and judgments were passed. And it was a social event where alliances were forged and reputations were made or broken. At the center of the proceedings is the log sogum adr, the law speaker. This is a highly respected individual who has memorized the entirety of the region's laws. His brain is their living constitution. At the start of each thing, he would recite a portion of the law from memory, ensuring the legal traditions were passed down unknown by all. The case of the moved boundary stone is brought forward. The two men making the accusation and the defense stand before a panel of chieftains or respected elders who act as judges. There are no lawyers in the modern sense. Each man must plead his own case. They call witnesses, they present their arguments, and they swear sacred oaths on a silver ring consecrated to the gods. An oath was a profoundly serious matter. To break one was to risk not only your reputation in this life, but also divine retribution in the next. You listen as the arguments fly back and forth. It's less about hard evidence. There are no surveillance cameras or forensic surveyors, and more about character, reputation, and who can tell a more convincing story. The judges listen intently. Their goal isn't just to find the truth, but to find a solution that the community will accept, something that will restore peace and prevent a blood feud. The judgment is finally passed. The accused is found to be in the wrong, but the punishment isn't jail time. Prisons as we know them didn't really exist. The punishment is a fine, a specific amount of silver or goods to be paid to the wronged party. This system of fines and compensations, or WER guildman payment, was the cornerstone of their justice system. Almost any crime, from theft to murder, had a price. The amount depended on the crime's severity and the social status of the victim. Harming a wealthy, landed farmer cost more than harming an endless laborer. It was a deeply unequal system, but its purpose was practical to prevent endless cycles of revenge by turning injury into a financial transaction. Here's a bizarre legal concept you might witness at the thing a home gang. If a dispute couldn't be settled through argument, or if a matter of honor was at stake, one man could challenge another to a duel. This wasn't a chaotic brawl. It was a highly ritualized combat fought on a small island or a marked-off piece of land. Homer means islet. Gang means a walk or go. There were specific rules about the weapons, the number of shields allowed, and the conditions for victory. The first to draw blood might be declared the winner, or it could be a fight to the death. The winner of the home gang was believed to have been favored by the gods, their victory a divine judgment. It was, in effect, trial by combat. Of course, the functioning of the thing is a subject of intense academic debate. The sagas portray these assemblies as dramatic, eloquent, and often violent events. But how much of that is literary flair? Historians wonder about the level of participation from average farmers. Did they have a real voice? Or were they just there to rubber stamp the decisions of the powerful local chieftains? The law stated that all free men had a say, but in practice, wealth and influence likely spoke loudest. The idea of a pure, grassroots Viking democracy is probably a romantic exaggeration, but the fact that these regular, local assemblies existed at all shows a deep-seated belief in community-led governance. The sun has set by the time the thing concludes. The dispute is settled. For now, you walk back to the longhouse in the dark, the stars brilliant in the unpolluted sky. You didn't speak. You didn't vote. You just watched. But you witnessed the gears of this society turning. It's a society without a police force, without prisons, held together by memory, honor, and the collective will of the community, argued out in an open field under the sky. It feels both incredibly primitive and surprisingly sophisticated at the same time. Back in the longhouse, the central fire has been built up, casting a warm, dancing light that pushes back the ever-present gloom. The evening meal is being prepared more porridge, perhaps with a few pieces of boiled salted fish stirred in for flavor. The fine use all levied at the thing has you thinking. How does that even work? How do you pay a fine of, say, 12 ounces of silver when you've never seen a coin in your life? You're about to get a lesson in Viking Age economics, and it's a system that runs on trust, weight, and a good eye for quality. You sidle up to one of the men from your household who is examining a small collection of items in a leather pouch. He lays them out on a piece of cloth. It's a motley assortment of bent silver armoring, a small, crudely cut piece of a silver dish, a single, ornate tearing from a far-off land, and a few lumpen, misshapen chunks of raw silver. This is your cash. The Viking Age largely operated on what is known as a bullion or weight economy. For most of their history, they didn't mint their own coins. Instead, the primary currency was silver, and to a lesser extent, gold. But it wasn't the form of the silver that mattered. It was its weight and purity. A beautiful, intricately decorated bracelet was worth exactly the same as a mangled, ugly lump of silver if they weighed the same. This is why so much of the Viking silver we find today is in the form of hack silver. When a Viking needed to buy something, a cow, a new axe head, a cloak, they would take a larger piece of silver, like a bracelet or a necklace, and literally hack a piece off with a chisel or an axe. This is why archaeologists find so many fragments of what were once beautiful objects. To their original owners, they weren't vandalized artifacts, they were just divisible units of currency, like making change from a $20 bill. The man from your household pulls out a crucial piece of equipment, a small, portable set of scales. It's a delicate bronze balance beam with 2 small pans, which folds up neatly to be carried in a pouch. He places the piece of hack silver he wants to weigh in one pan. In the other, he places a series of small, decorated weights made of lead, bronze, or iron. These weights were often standardized, though the system could vary from region to region. He carefully adds or removes weights until the beam is perfectly balanced. Now, he knows the exact value of his piece of silver. When it comes time to trade, this little weighing ceremony will happen every single time. A transaction wasn't as simple as handing over a coin. It was a negotiation. You'd agree on a price and weight. Then the buyer would offer a piece of silver. The seller would inspect it, maybe even nick it with a knife to make sure it wasn't just a lead piece plated in silver. Then weigh it. If it was too heavy, the buyer might have to cut a smaller piece off. If it was too light, they'd have to add another small scrap of silver to make up the difference. It was a slow, deliberate process built entirely on this public verification of weight. But what if you didn't have any silver for every day? Small-scale transactions within the community. You wouldn't use silver at all. That was for big purchases, legal fines, or trade with foreigners. The local economy ran on barter and favors. You might trade a length of woolen cloth you wove for a new clay pot from the local potter. You might promise to help your neighbor with his harvest in exchange for a share of his catch from the river. It was an economy of I owe you one, where social relationships were just as valuable as silver. Here's a quirky detail about this system: the silver itself came from all over the world. Vikings didn't have their own silver mines. The vast hoards of silver found in Scandinavia are a testament to their wide-reaching network. There are Anglo-Saxon coins from England, Carolingian coins from France, and, most numerous of all, silver dirhams from the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate, centered in places like Baghdad. These Arabic coins were highly prized for their reliable purity. Most Vikings couldn't read the Arabic script on them, but they recognized the quality. They were just another form of bullion. often chopped up and used as hack silver just like a bracelet. The precise nature of this silver economy is still a hot topic for historians and numismatists, coin experts. A key debate revolves around the role of coins. While they were often treated as simple bullion, some evidence suggests that in major trading towns like Dubai or Burqa, certain types of coins might have started to be used by count rather than by weight for smaller transactions. This would represent a slow transition towards a true coin-based economy. Was the Viking world on the cusp of its own monetary revolution? Or was this a minor trend in a system still dominated by weight? The evidence is ambiguous, and the answer probably differs depending on where and when you were in the Viking Age. You watch as the man carefully packs his scales and his little bag of silver away. It's a cumbersome, inefficient system by modern standards, but it worked. It was transparent, adaptable, and it fueled a network that stretched from North America to Central Asia. It's a system where wealth wasn't an abstract number in a bank account, but something tangible you could hold in your hand, weigh, and hack into pieces to buy your dinner. It makes the world feel very direct, very physical, and very, very different. The day is winding down, but the work isn't. While some people are mending tools or tending to the animals for the night, you notice a corner of the longhouse dedicated to quieter, more focused tasks. The flickering firelight illuminates a woman sitting on a stool, her head bent in concentration. She's not weaving or spinning. In her hands, she holds a small piece of antler. Then with a sharp iron knife, she is slowly, meticulously carving. It's a scene of intense, patient craftsmanship that feels a world away from the brute force of the farm work. You move closer to watch. She is making a comb, not a cheap plastic one, but a complex, composite comb made from several pieces of antler, riveted together. She has already carved the teeth, a row of fine, perfectly spaced tines. Now, she is carving intricate designs into the handleless series of interlocking knots and geometric patterns. It's a process that has already taken hours and will take many more. Each scrape of the knife is precise, deliberate. A single slip could ruin the entire piece. This is the hidden industry of the Viking Age, while the men were farming or, occasionally, raiding. The quiet hours were filled with handicraft. In a world without factories or mass production, everything had to be made by hand, and everything means everything. The spoon you ate your porridge with was carved from wood or bone. The clay pot the porridge was cooked in was shaped and fired by hand. The iron nails holding the longhouse together were individually forged by a blacksmith. The glass beads worn as decoration were made one by one, a difficult and mysterious process that involved melting crushed glass or skin over a fire. You try to imagine the sheer amount of time this requires. A modern person wanting a new shirt goes to a store. A Viking woman wanting a new shirt had to start with a sheep. She had to shear it, clean the wool, card it, spin it into thread on a drop spindle, dye the thread using plants she foraged, and then weave it into cloth on a loom she probably helped build. The entire process could take weeks or even months. As a result, people owned very few items of clothing. Each one was a testament to countless hours of labor and was repaired and patched until it literally fell apart. The artisans you see around you are not necessarily specialists in the modern sense. While a blacksmith or a skilled jeweler might have a dedicated role in a larger community, on a farmstead like this, most people were jacks of all trades. The same man who plowed the field might spend his winter evenings carving a beautiful new handle for his favorite knife. The woman who managed the household might also be a master weaver, her patterns known throughout the local area. Craftsmanship wasn't a job, it was a fundamental skill for survival, woven into the fabric of daily life. Let's talk about a surprisingly common but incredibly tedious craft: making rope. Rope was essential. You needed it for your ship's rigging, for tethering animals, for hauling timber, for baling hay, and it had to be made from scratch. One of the most common materials was bast fiber, the inner bark of trees like linden or elm. You'd have to peel the bark, soak it in water, for weeks to soften it, a process called adding, which smells absolutely awful, and then painstakingly separate and twist the fibers into cordage. Another source was animal hair, especially horsehair. It was a mundane, repetitive, and absolutely vital task. Now for a peculiar, almost magical craft, making whetstones in industrial quantities. Whetstones, for sharpening knives and swords, were a crucial Viking export. In certain parts of Norway, there were entire mountains made of the perfect type of schist. For generations, people in these regions quarried this stone, splitting it into long, rectangular bars. These whetstone quarries were a massive industrial enterprise. Archaeologists have found evidence of tens of thousands of whetstones being produced and shipped all over Europe. For the people living there, their entire economy was based on splitting these specific rocks. It was a monotonous, dusty, and dangerous job, but it connected their remote mountain home to the wider Viking world. The exact organization of craft production is a subject of ongoing archaeological research. One of the big questions is the degree of specialization. For example, we find beautiful, intricate metalwork like those turtle brooches women used to fasten their dresses. Were these made by itinerant craftsmen who traveled from farm to farm, offering their services, or did you have to travel to a larger trading center like Birka to buy them? And what about pottery? Some styles are very localized, suggesting each community had its own potter, but other types are found all over, implying a more organized production and distribution network. Unraveling these ancient supply chains is a complex puzzle that relies on analyzing the chemical composition of clay and the subtle stylistic differences in a brooch's design. You look back at the woman carving the comb. The firelight glints off the polished surface of the antler. In her hands, a simple, utilitarian object is being transformed into a small work of art. It's a reminder that these people, despite the harshness of their lives, had a deep appreciation for beauty and a profound capacity for patience. Their world was not disposable. Every object was an investment of time and skill, meant to be used, cared for, and valued. You realize that in this era, to own something beautiful was to own a piece of someone's life, a piece of their precious, unrecoverable time. The last of the day's chores are done. The animals are secured. The tools are put away, and the heavy wooden bar has been slid across the inside of the longhouse door, sealing you in for the night. The central fire is the only source of light and warmth, painting the faces of the 30 or so people in the room in flickering shades of orange and red. The wind howls outside, the low, mournful sound that emphasizes your isolation. Your modern brain, trained by a lifetime of endless stimulation, starts to scream. What do you do now? There's no Wi-Fi, no television, no book to read. Most people are illiterate, and candles are too precious to waste on reading anyway. There's no music streaming from a speaker. The work is over, but the day is not. You are now entering the long, dark, and potentially mind-numbingly boring Viking Age evening. So, what are the entertainment options? You look around. A few people are quietly mending their clothes or sharpening a knife, combining chores with leisure. But most are just sitting. They're gathered on the benches around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. Then, an old man with a long white beard and eyes that seem to have seen 1,000 winters clears his throat. A hush falls over the longhouse. He begins to speak. His voice is low and raspy, but it fills the smoky hall. He isn't just talking, he's storytelling. H.E.S. recounting one of the great sagas, maybe the tale of Ragnar Brock and his sons, or the tragic story of the hero Sigurd who slays the dragon Fafnir. He speaks of brave warriors, cunning kings, vengeful women, and mischievous gods. He doesn't read from a script. He recites it from memory, a story passed down through generations. The children sit wide-eyed, captivated. The adults nod along, knowing the story well but savoring the performance. This is their television, their movie theater, their podcast, all rolled into one. The skald, or poet, was a highly respected figure in Norse society. A good storyteller could earn fame and fortune, traveling from one chieftain's hall to another, trading tales for food and lodging. For the people on this farm, this old man is their connection to their history, their culture, and the wider world. In another corner, a different kind of entertainment is unfolding. Two men are sitting across from each other, a wooden board between them. The board is etched with a grid of squares. They are playing a game. It's a strategy game, a battle of wits that requires focus and foresight. This is likely HNE or King's Table. It's an asymmetrical game. One player has a king in the center of the board, protected by a small number of defenders. The other player has a larger force of attackers positioned on the edges. The goal of the king's player is to get the king to safety in one of the corner squares. The goal of the attacker is to surround and capture the king. HNE was incredibly popular throughout the Norse world. Game boards and pieces made of bone, glass, or amber have been found in graves and settlements from Ireland to Ukraine. It was the Viking version of chess, a way to sharpen the mind and pass the long, dark hours of winter. You watch the players, their faces tense with concentration. Each move is deliberate. It's a silent, intellectual battle that provides a stark contrast to the boisterous storytelling happening on the other side of the fire. What about music? There was music, but it would sound strange to your ears. You might hear someone playing a simple wooden flute or a lyre-like instrument called a tall harp. The melodies would be simple, repetitive, and based on a different scale than modern Western music, giving them a haunting, folk-like quality. Someone might start to sing a lament or a work song, their voice raw and untrained but full of emotion. It's not a performance, it's a communal expression of feeling. And, of course, there was drinking. The household would have its own brewed ale, a weak, cloudy, and slightly sour beer that was a staple of the diet. For special occasions, they might drink mead, a sweet, fermented honey wine. The sagas are full of scenes of great feasts with copious amounts of drinking, boasting, and oath swearing. But on a normal night like this, drinking was more moderate. It was a way to warm the body and relax after a hard day's work. Here's a small, weird detail about evening entertainment riddles. The Norse, like many ancient cultures, loved riddles. They were a test of cleverness and wit. The Poetic Edda, a collection of old Norse poems, contains a whole series of them, where the god Odin engages in a battle of wits with a giant. These riddles could be simple: what is that which grows in the winter, dies in the summer, and is covered with roots on top, or complex and metaphorical? The answer to that one, by the way, is an icicle. It was another way to keep the mind sharp during the downtime. Historians and literary scholars are still trying to understand the full context of these evening gatherings. One of the ongoing discussions is about the nature of the sagas themselves. When that old man tells the story of Ragnar, is he recounting history as he believes it, or is it understood by everyone to be a form of historical fiction, embellished for dramatic effect? The line between myth, history, and entertainment was much blurrier than it is today. They didn't consume stories with a critical eye for historical accuracy, they absorbed them as part of their cultural identity. The sagas weren't just stories, they were statements about who they were and what values they held dear. As the fire dies down to embers, the storytelling winds to a close. The game of HNE ends with a quiet nod of concession. The longhouse grows silent again, save for the wind outside and the gentle snores that are already beginning to start. You lie down on your hard wooden platform, pulling the scratchy wool blanket over you. Your day was filled with physical toil, and your evening was filled with a quiet, simple, and profoundly slow form of entertainment. There was no instant gratification, no endless scroll. There was just the fire, the human voice, and a shared sense of community in the dark. You wake up in the middle of the night, not from a bad dream, but from a persistent, maddening itch. It's on your scalp, behind your ears, along the waistband of your linen undertunic. You try to ignore it, but it's impossible. As you scratch, a horrible fact dawns on you lace. In the close, crowded, and not exactly spotless environment of the longhouse, parasites are a fact of life. This realization sparks a more pressing question in your modern mind. How on earth do you stay clean here? Your 21st century notions of hygiene are about to get a serious reality check, but the answer might also surprise you. The stereotypical image of the Viking is a grimy, smelly, filth-encrusted brute. The reality, according to both archaeological finds and contemporary accounts, is quite different. The Vikings were, for their time, surprisingly fastidious about personal grooming. Come morning, you witness the routine. People don't hop into a hot shower. Of course, the primary method of washing is a simple basin of cold water, usually fetched from a nearby stream or well. You get a splash of water on your face and hands. It's bracing, to say the least. There's no soap as you know it. They did have a form of soap, but it was harsh stuff made from animal fat and ashlie, and it was primarily used for washing clothes, not people. For your body, cold water would have to do. But the real focus of their grooming was on their hair and beards. After your cold water splash, someone hands you a comb. It's one of those beautifully carved bone combs you saw being made. A prized personal possession. You are expected to use it. Combing your hair thoroughly every day was not just about looking good. It was the most effective way to remove dirt, debris, and, yes, lice. A well-groomed head of hair and unneatly trimmed beard were signs of discipline and self-respect. Then there's the weekly ritual Saturday. The Old Norse word for Saturday is laugardagur, which literally means washing day or bath day. This was the day for a more thorough cleaning. The whole household would troop down to the nearest lake or river. Yes, even in the frigid north, you'd strip down and take a full-body plunge into the icy water. It's a shocking, heart-stopping experience, but it was the most effective way to get properly clean. In some wealthier communities, or in the settlements built around natural hot springs in Iceland, they had something even better about it. This was a small, separate hut, often dug partially into the ground for insulation. Stones would be heated in a fire and then placed in the center of the hut. Water would be thrown on the hot stones, creating a thick cloud of steam. It was a sauna. Here, in the dark, sweltering heat, you could sweat out the dirt and grime of the week. It was a cleansing ritual and a social event, a place to relax and talk, hidden away from the wind and cold. This obsession with cleanliness was so notable that it was commented on by outsiders. The English chronicler John of Wallingford, writing in the 13th century, complained that the Danish Vikings were far too popular with Anglo-Saxon women precisely because of their grooming habits. He wrote, with a clear note of resentment, that they combed their hair daily, they took a bath every Saturday, and they changed their woolen clothes regularly. In his eyes, these clean, well-groomed foreigners were seducing the local women with their suspiciously good hygiene. Here's a slightly bizarre grooming tool that has been found in Viking graves: tweezers. Small, simple bronze tweezers are a common find, usually alongside combs. What were they for plucking stray beard or eyebrow hairs? Certainly, but some historians speculate they were also used for pulling splinters, a common affliction in a world of manual labor, or even for personal, intimate grooming. It's a small object that speaks to a detailed level of personal care. But, as with everything, there are scholarly debates. The main one circles back to that issue of parasites. Despite the combing in the Saturday baths, skeletal and archaeological evidence shows that lice, fleas, and internal worms were rampant. How do we reconcile the accounts of their cleanliness with the evidence of infestation? The likely answer is that their standards of clean were simply different from ours. Washing in cold river water once a week and combing your hair is a huge step up from never washing at all. But it's not going to eliminate parasites in a world without medicated shampoos or modern sanitation. They were likely fighting a constant, losing battle against infestation. They were cleaner than their contemporaries, but they were still, by our standards, very itchy. So, you stand by the river, shivering after your Saturday dip. Your skin red from the cold. You feel cleaner, for sure. But as you pull on your same old scratchy wool tunic which might get washed once or twice a season, if it's lucky, you realize hygiene is a complex and relative concept. You can be the best groomed person in the 10th century and still be a walking ecosystem for tiny, unwelcome guests. It's a humbling thought as you meticulously comb your damp hair, hoping to win today's battle in the endless war against the itch. You've survived the cold, the work, the boredom, and the itchiness, but now you face a threat that no amount of physical strength or mental fortitude can overcome on its own. You're getting sick. It starts with a cough, a deep, rattling sound that seems to come from your very bones. Then comes the fever, a wave of heat that leaves you sweating and shivering under your wool blanket. In the 21st century, you do reach for some over-the-counter cold medicine. Here, your options are far more limited and significantly more uncertain. There are no doctors in white coats, no sterile clinics, no pharmacies. Your healthcare provider is likely to be one of two people, the local wise woman or VO, LVA, or perhaps the HUS Freda herself, who holds the collective folk knowledge of her ancestors. You are brought to her, weak and feverish. She looks at you not with a stethoscope, but with a trained eye, observing your breathing, the color of your skin, the look in your eyes. Her first line of defense is the original pharmacy, the natural world. She has a deep and intimate knowledge of the local plants and their properties. For your cough and fever, she might prepare a tea brewed from yarrow, a common plant known for its fever-reducing and anti-inflammatory properties. Or perhaps she'll use midoswat, which contains salicylic acid, the natural precursor to aspirin. She might also make a poultice of crushed angelica root to place on your chest. Its strong aromatic compounds believed to help clear the lungs. This isn't random guesswork, it's a form of herbalism passed down through generations, a science of trial and error. But medical care in the Viking Age wasn't just about physical remedies. It was deeply intertwined with the supernatural. Sickness was often seen as an intrusion, a result of malevolent spirits, a curse from an enemy, or the disfavor of the gods. Therefore, the treatment had to address both the physical symptoms and the spiritual cause. As the wise woman gives you the herbal tea, she might also begin to chant. She speaks in a low, rhythmic monotone, calling on the benevolent spirits of the land or perhaps on Ire, the Norse goddess associated with healing. She might perform a ritual, like tying a red thread around your wrist to bind the sickness, or drawing a protective rune on your forehead with ash from the hearth. To your modern mind, this seems like pure superstition. To the people here, it is an essential part of the healing process. The body and the spirit are not separate to heal one. You must tend to the other. If your ailment was more physical, like a wound from a farm accident or a battle, the treatment would be more direct. They were skilled at setting broken bones, using splints and tightly wrapped bandages. They could stitch wounds closed using a needle and thread made from animal sinew, and they had a surprisingly effective, if disgusting, method for cleaning wounds, a special onion and garlic soup. A 10th century medical text describes a recipe where strong-smelling weakened garlic broth is fed to a wounded man. The healers would then smell the wound. If they could smell the garlic coming from the wound, it meant the abdominal wall was breached and the injury was likely fatal. It was a crude but effective diagnostic tool. Recent scientific studies have even shown that garlic and onion have powerful antibacterial properties, suggesting this wound soup might have actually helped prevent infection. Here's a small, slightly unsettling detail about their medicine elf shot. If someone was struck by a sudden, sharp, invisible pain, what we might diagnose as a heart attack, a stroke, or even a severe muscle cramp, it was often blamed on elf scot or elf shot. The belief was that invisible elves had fired a tiny, magical arrow into the victim. The treatment, therefore, involved rituals to remove the imaginary projectile and appease the elves. It's a fascinating insight into how they explain sudden, internal medical events without any knowledge of anatomy or physiology. The effectiveness of Viking Age medicine is, naturally, a major point of scholarly contention. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains find evidence of incredible resilience. They see bones that were broken and healed cleanly, suggesting skilled bone setting. They find people who survived traumatic head injuries and lived for years afterward. There's even evidence of basic dentistry, like filed teeth or attempts to treat infected gums. However, the same skeletons tell a grimmer story. The average life expectancy was low, perhaps around 35-40 years. Infant and child mortality was tragically high. Many skeletons show signs of chronic nutritional deficiencies, parasitic infections, and debilitating arthritis from a lifetime of hard labor. For all their herbal knowledge and practical skills, they were powerless against the major killers: widespread infection, pandemic diseases, and complications from childbirth. A simple cut could lead to a fatal infection. A flu epidemic could wipe out a significant portion of a village. You lie on your platform, sipping the bitter herbal tea, the sound of the chanting aloha in the smoky air. You are caught between two worlds of medicine. Part of you knows that the meadows, what might actually be reducing your fever, it's salicylic acid working its ancient magic. The other part is terrified by the complete reliance on folk wisdom and ritual. Your survival depends not on sterile science, but on the strength of your own immune system, the efficacy of a plant picked from a bog, and, perhaps, the goodwill of the gods. Your fever has broken, thanks to a combination of potent herbs, a strong constitution, and perhaps a little bit of luck. As you slowly regain your strength, you start noticing something you deep previously overlooked. They are everywhere, scratched into the most mundane of objects. You see them on the handle of a wooden spoon, on the side of your bone comb, on the frame of the loom, and even on a large stone standing at the edge of the farmstead. They are runes. To your eyes, they look like a collection of sharp, angular, almost cryptic symbols. You see lines that look like a modern F, R, P, and X. They are stark, deliberate, and seem to hold a secret power. And in a way, they do. This is the Viking Age alphabet, the Futhark, and it was far more than just a way to write things down. You watch as a man takes a knife and carefully carves a single rune. Let's say it's the symbol for TTIWAZE, which is shaped like an upward pointing arrow onto the hilt of a new spear he has made. He isn't writing his name. He is imbuing the weapon with the quality of the rune itself. TIWA is the rune of the sky god Tyr, a deity associated with justice, sacrifice, and victory in battle. By carving this rune, the man is performing a magical act, asking for the spear to be true and for its wielder to be victorious. This is the dual nature of runes. On one hand, they were a practical writing system. The elder Futhark, the earliest version and the later younger Futharkor, used to record names, mark ownership Gunnar owns this comb, or create memorials. The memorial runestones you see dotting the Scandinavian landscape are a perfect example. A chieftain might raise a stone to commemorate a son who died in England, with an inscription like Bjorn, son of Sven, raised the stone in memory of his brother, Olaf, a very good warrior. He died in the West. It was a public and permanent record of family, honor, and loss. But on the other hand, each rune was also a symbol with an inherent, magical meaning and a specific name. The F rune, Hu, meant cattle or wealth and was associated with prosperity. The U rune, URUZ, meant Te, you were ox, a wild ox, and symbolized strength and vitality. The S rune, Seohailu, meant sun and was a symbol of life and power. To write a rune was not just to form a letter, it was to invoke its power. This is why you see them on everyday objects. A rune for protection might be carved over the door of the longhouse. A rune for a safe journey might be scratched onto the prow of a ship. A rune for a good harvest might be carved into a plow. It was a form of ambient magic, woven into the very fabric of their world. The actual art of carving runes was a specialized skill. The angular shapes are no accident. They were designed to be easily carved into wood or stone, consisting mostly of vertical and diagonal lines, avoiding horizontal lines that would get lost in the grain of the wood. The person who could not only carve the runes but also understood their deeper magical meanings was a powerful figure, known as a runemaster. Here's a small, curious detail about runic magic curses. Just as runes could be used for protection and good fortune, they could also be weaponized. A particularly nasty form of curse involved creating an ID stang, or cursing pole. This involved erecting a horse's head on a pole, carving malevolent runes onto it, and pointing it in the direction of your enemy. It was a powerful and terrifying act of symbolic aggression, intended to bring misfortune and ruin upon the target. The sagas describe these curses with a chilling sense of dread. The full extent of runic literacy in magic is a subject of passionate debate among runologists and historians. A major question is who could read and write runes. Was it a secret knowledge held only by a small elite of chieftains and runemasteresses, or was it a more widespread, basic literacy, where the average farmer might know how to carve their own name or a few simple protective symbols? The evidence is tantalizingly ambiguous. The sheer number of runic inscriptions found on everyday items suggests a certain level of familiarity across society. However, the more complex and poetic inscriptions on the large memorial stones clearly point to the work of highly skilled and educated specialists. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Another debate centers on the magical aspect. Some modern interpretations, especially in neo-pagan circles, have built complex systems of divination and magic around the runes, treating them like a form of Norse tarot cards. But how much of this is based on actual Viking Age practice? While the sagas and poems clearly state that runes were used for magic, Odin himself hangs from the world tree for 9 nights to gain the knowledge of the runes. The specific details of these rituals are lost to time. Scholars are cautious about overstating the case, trying to separate what we know from historical sources from what has been reconstructed or imagined in modern times. You run your finger over a rune carved into the wooden bench you're sitting on. It's the B rune, Borkana, symbolizing birth, renewal, and the birch tree. Perhaps someone carved it here to wish health and fertility upon the women of the house who sat here to weave or give birth. It's a silent, hopeful message from 1,000 years ago. You realize that these sharp, strange letters are not just an alphabet. They are a window into the Viking mind, a world where language was power, where writing was a magical act, and where the line between the mundane and the mystical was as thin as a knife's edge. One evening, as the storyteller by the fire begins his tale, he doesn't speak of human heroes or epic battles. Instead, he lowers his voice conspiratorially and starts to tell a story about the gods. He talks about Odin, the All-Father, who is not a benevolent, all-knowing deity, but a restless, shifty, and morally ambiguous wanderer, obsessed with gaining knowledge at any cost, even sacrificing his own eye for a drink from the well of wisdom. He tells a story about Thor, the mighty god of thunder. But, in this tale, Thor isn't just smashing giants with his hammer. Volender, H.E.S., a comically hot-tempered, slightly dim-witted, and gluttonous character who once had to dress up as the goddess Freya in a wedding dress to retrieve his stolen hammer from a giant who wanted to marry her. The children giggle as the storyteller describes the mighty Thor trying to act dainty, his massive beard hidden under a veil. Then he speaks of Loki, not as a simple villain, but as a complex, charismatic, and mischievous trickster. H.E.S., a blood brother to Odin, the god who helps the others as often as he causes catastrophic problems for them. HES the one who comes up with the clever plan to get Thor's hammer back, but HES also the one who, through a cruel prank, orchestrates the death of the beautiful god Baldar, setting in motion the events that will lead to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. You are listening to the gossip of Asgard, and you realize that the Norse gods are not the perfect, infallible beings of many other religions. They are deeply, profoundly, and entertainingly flawed. They are riddled with vanity, greed, jealousy, and impulsiveness. They lie, they cheat, they hold grudges, and they make terrible decisions. They are, in many ways, just like the humans who worship them, only with superpowers. This is the core of Norse mythology. It wasn't a rigid dogma written in a holy book. It was a fluid collection of stories, poems, and beliefs that explained the world and reflected the values of the society that told them. There was no concept of sin in the Christian sense. Actions weren't inherently good or evil, they were judged by their consequences and their impact on one's honor and reputation. Odin's constant scheming isn't seen as sinful, it's part of his nature as a seeker of power and knowledge, qualities a Viking chieftain would understand and respect. The pantheon itself was a messy, sprawling family. You had the two main tribes of gods, the warrior like Essi Thor, Tyr who lived in Asgard, and the nature-associated Vanir Freyja, Njord who came from Vanaheim. They had once fought a great war but now lived together in a tentative peace, a divine reflection of the way different tribes and families had to learn to coexist in the human world. Worship wasn't about quiet prayer in a temple. While there might have been some cultic buildings or sacred groves dedicated to certain gods, most worship was personal and direct. It was transactional. You would make an offering, a portion of your meal, a sacrificed animal, a valuable object to a specific god to ask for a specific outcome. You'd sacrifice to Thor for protection on a journey or for good weather for your crops. You'd make an offering to Freya for fertility or a successful birth. You'd leave a gift for the land VDTT, the local spirits of the land, so they wouldn't cause trouble for your farm. It was a relationship based on reciprocity, a gift for a gift. Here's a small, weird detail from the mythology: divine transportation. The gods had the coolest rides. Odin rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, who was actually one of Loki's children. Long story. Thor's chariot was pulled not by horses, but by 2 giant goats named Tangrisnir Teeth Bearer and Ten-Ngn Jostart Teeth Grinder. The best part, if he was hungry on a journey, Thor could cook and eat his goats, and as long as he placed their bones back in their skins, he could resurrect them with his hammer the next day. The god Freyr had a ship, Skidbladnir, that was so large it could hold all the gods, but it could also be folded up and put in his pocket. It was a mythology filled with this kind of imaginative, slightly bizarre detail. One of the most debated topics among scholars is the very nature of this religion. Was it a unified, coherent system of belief across the entire Viking world? The answer is almost certainly no. The stories and the importance of certain gods likely varied hugely from Norway to Sweden to Iceland. Some communities might have been devoted to Thor, while others focused on Odin or Freyr. Some scholars argue it's better to think of it not as a single Norse religion, but as a collection of local and regional Norse religions. Furthermore, how literally did the average Viking take these stories? Did they truly believe Thor's hammer caused thunder, or were the stories more like beloved fables, carrying moral and cultural truths without being literal accounts? This is the belief question, and it's almost impossible to answer definitively. Most likely, the level of literal belief varied from person to person, just as it does in any faith. For some, the tales were literal truth. For others, they were powerful metaphors for the chaotic, beautiful, and often unfair world they lived in. The storyteller's voice drops as he reaches the end of his tale, describing the inevitable doom of Ragnarok, where the gods and their enemies will all destroy each other in a final, cataclysmic battle. but he ends on a note of hope after the destruction. The new, green world will emerge from the sea, and a new generation of gods will rule. It's a cyclical view of existence, one of struggle, doom, and rebirth. You look around at the faces in the firelight. They are not listening to a sermon. They are sharing in a collective, cultural inheritance. These flawed, messy, all too human gods were their gods. They reflected their own world, a world where strength was valued, that cunning was often more effective, a world where honor was paramount, that betrayal was always a possibility, and a world where even the gods themselves were not safe from their fate. Spring arrives, not as a gentle thaw, but as a muddy, messy, and chaotic melt. The world, which has been frozen solid for months, suddenly turns to slush. But with the melting ice comes a new energy, a palpable restlessness in the air. The talk around the fire is no longer just about farming and local disputes. It's about the sea, the call of the open water, a route to trade, exploration, and plunder is awakening. A longship, which has been sheltered on land all winter, needs to be made ready, and you're about to discover that getting a ship seaworthy is a smelly, disgusting, and laborious process. You follow a group down to the shore where the ship rests. It's a magnificent sight, even on dry land. It's a KARV, a medium-sized vessel, long, narrow, and elegant, with a high, curving prow carved into the shape of a dragon's head. Its clinker-built hull, where the planks overlap like scales, gives it a unique combination of strength and flexibility, allowing it to bend with the waves rather than fight them. This ship is the technological marvel of its age, the key that unlocked the world for the Norse people. That before it can taste the salt water again, it needs to be waterproof, and that's your job. You are handed a bucket of a thick, dark, and unimaginably foul-smelling substance. It's a mixture of tar and animal hair. The tar was produced by a slow, controlled burning of pine roots, a process that took days and created a dense, black smoke that stained the landscape. Your task is to slather the sticky, gooey mess into every seam and crack of the ship's hull. It gets on your hands, then your hair, on your clothes. The smell is overpowering. A pungent aroma of pine and burnt chemicals that clings to you for days. While you're busy tarring the hull, others are working on the sail. The single, large, square sail was the ship's engine. It was made from dozens of strips of woolen cloth, painstakingly woven by the women of the household during the winter. The wool on its own is not waterproof and catches too much wind, so it needs to be treated. How with a delightful concoction of horse grease, tallow-rendered animal fat, and sometimes even ochre. This greasy mixture is rubbed into the wool, making it more resistant to water and less porous. It also makes the sail incredibly heavy and, you guessed it, very smelly. The rigging needs to be checked. Every inch of the rope inspected for fraying. This rope, made from materials like linden bast or walrus hide, was the ship's nervous system. The mast, a single tall pine trunk, needs to be stepped, a delicate and dangerous operation involving a lot of muscle and coordination. Everything must be perfect. At sea, a leaking seam, a torn sail, or a snapped rope could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a watery grave. This process of preparation reveals a key aspect of Viking society. It was a maritime culture. Even for the farmers, the ship wasn't just a vehicle for a specialized group of warriors. It was an integral part of life for anyone living near the coast or a navigable river. It was their highway system, used for fishing, for moving goods to the local market, for visiting relatives on the next fjord over. The skills to build, maintain, and handle a ship were widespread. Here's a small, clever detail of their shipbuilding: the rudder. A Viking ship wasn't steered by a rudder at the back. It used a steer board from which we get our word starboard, which was a large, specialized or mounted on the right side of the ship, near the stern. This design made the ships incredibly maneuverable and allowed them to be steered even in very shallow water. a huge advantage for beaching the vessel on a hostile shore or navigating a tricky river. The exact science behind their navigation is still a major topic of academic fascination and debate. How did they manage to cross the vast, featureless expanse of the North Atlantic to reach Iceland, Greenland, and even North America? They didn't have magnetic compasses which wouldn't arrive in Europe for another couple of centuries. They primarily used dead reckoning, calculating their position based on their speed, the time elapsed, and their direction. They were expert observers of the natural world. They used the position of the sun during the day and the North Star at night. They watched the flight patterns of birds, knowing that certain species meant land was near. They could read the color and swell of the water. But did they have any navigational tools? This is where the controversy lies. The sagas mention a mysterious solar stein or sunstone. This is believed to be a type of crystal, like cordierite, that can polarize light. By holding it up to the sky, a skilled navigator could use it to find the position of the sun, even on a cloudy or overcast day. A crystal that fits this description was found in a shipwreck off the Channel Islands, lending credibility to the theory. However, the evidence is still scant, and many historians remain skeptical, arguing that expert knowledge of the natural world was sufficient. The sunstone remains a tantalizing possibility, a piece of lost Viking technology that bridges the gap between folk wisdom and scientific instrumentation. Finally, after days of hard, smelly work, the ship is ready. It's time for the launch. Using rollers on sheer manpower, the entire community pushes and pulls the great vessel down the beach and into the water. It floats, perfectly balanced. The sail is raised. It catches the wind, and the ship seems to come alive. As you watch it bobbing on the waves, you feel a sense of collective pride and accomplishment. You're covered in tar and grease, and you smell awful, but you were a part of this. You helped prepare the key that would unlock the horizon, and now, the question hangs in the salting dare who will be going on the voyage. The longship is ready, a potent symbol of power and potential bobbing in the fjord. The talk in the longhouse is now of who will join the crew. The seasoned warrior is sharpening his axe, his face a mask of grim determination. The young man, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, looks on with a mixture of fear and excitement. He sees a chance for wealth, for fame, for a story to tell. This is the moment where a farmer has the chance to become something else. This is where he can go a Viking. And that's the crucial point you need to understand. Viking was not who they were, it was what they did. It was a job description, a summer activity. The word itself, Viking, is of Old Norse origin, and its precise meaning is one of those things scholars love to argue about. One theory is that it comes from the word vik, meaning bay or inlet. So a Viking was someone who lurked in a bay, waiting to prey on passing ships. Another theory links it to the Old English wic, meaning a camp or trading town, suggesting it was originally about temporary campaigning. A third, less popular theory suggests it comes from the verb vikja, meaning to turn away or to travel. Whatever its origin, in the 9th and 10th centuries, it came to mean one thing: a seaborne raid for plunder. When the young man from your farmstead decides to join the crew, he isn't changing his ethnic identity. He is a Norseman, a Dane, a Swede. He is simply taking on a temporary, high-risk, high-reward occupation. He will go Viking on a Viking expedition for the summer, and if he survives, he will return in the autumn to his farm, his family, and his life as a farmer. So why did they do it? What caused this explosion of reading that so terrified the rest of Europe? It's the million-dollar question of the Viking Age, and there's no single answer. It was a perfect storm of push and pull factors. The push factors came from within Scandinavia. Land was a finite resource, especially the good, arable farmland. As the population grew, younger sons who weren't going to inherit the family farm had to find other ways to make a living and build their own wealth. Political instability also played a role. powerful kings like Harald Fairhair in Norway were consolidating their power, forcing local chieftains to either submit or leave. For many, leaving to seek their fortune elsewhere was a more honorable choice. The pull factors were the temptations of the outside world. The rest of Europe was, to put it bluntly, rich and poorly defended. Monasteries, like the one at Lindisfarne in England that was the target of the first iconic raid in 793 AD, were unguarded storehouses of wealth. They had silver chalices, golden reliquaries, and beautifully illustrated manuscripts. To the pragmatic Norsemen, who didn't share the Christian faith, these were not sacred objects, they were just bullion and valuables, sitting there for the taking. The political fragmentation of places like England in the Carolingian Empire made them soft targets, unable to mount a coordinated naval defense. But here's a crucial aspect that often gets lost in the tales of raiding. Not all Viking activity was violent. The same ships and the same sea lanes used for raiding were also used for trade. A ship might set out from a fjord in Norway with a mixed crew. Some were there purely for a fight, but others were merchants, their goal being to trade furs, whetstones, and walrus ivory for silver, wine, and fine cloth. Often, the same person was both a raider and a trader. It was opportunistic. The line between a pirate and a merchant was exceptionally thin. Here's a small, slightly funny detail that illustrates their infamous reputation. An Arabic diplomat, Ibn Fadlan, who met a group of Rus Vikings on the Volga River in the 10th century, was both fascinated and appalled by them. He described them as perfect physical specimens, tall as 8 palms, but also as the filthiest of God's creatures. He was disgusted by their lack of hygiene, which, as we know, was still better than many others, showing how relative these things are in their public rituals. Yet, his detailed account is one of the most valuable outside perspectives we have on them. It shows a people who were powerful, intimidating, and utterly indifferent to the opinions of others. The debate over the trigger of the Viking Age is a classic chicken and egg problem for historians. Did new shipbuilding technology, the sail, suddenly make long-distance raiding possible, or did social and economic pressures at home drive them to innovate their maritime technology? Was it greed, land hunger, a political reaction, or just a spirit of adventure? The answer is likely all of the above. Different expeditions had different motivations. Some were small-scale pirate raids for quick cash. Others were massive, organized campaigns led by powerful kings with political ambitions. And still others were voyages of exploration and settlement, driven by a desire for new land. You watch the young man as he says goodbye to his family. He has his leather shoes, his wool tunic, and a simple spear. He hopes to come back with a share of silver big enough to buy his own land. His mother looks on with a stoic face, but her eyes betray her fear. She knows the odds. Many who go Viking do not return. They are lost to storms, to disease, or to an enemy's sword on a foreign shore. He is stepping out of the predictable, cyclical world of the farmstead into a world of chaos and chance. He is no longer just a farmer. For now, he is a Viking, and the world will never look at him the same way again. You've made the cut, whether through youthful ambition, a lack of other options, or simply being told to go. You are now part of the crew. You wade out into the frigid water, hoisting a heavy wooden sea chest onto your shoulder, and heave it aboard the long ship. This chest contains everything you will have for the next few months: a spare tunic, your cloak, a whetstone, and maybe a few pieces of dried fish. You find a spot to sit on the crossbeam that serves as a rower's bench. This tiny patch of wood will be your home. The chieftain gives the order. The huge, square sail is hauled up the mast. It catches the wind with a satisfying thump, and the ship lurches forward. You are on your way. The rhythmic creak of the timber, the snap of the sail, and the rush of water along the hull are the only sounds. The farmstead, the longhouse, your entire world, shrinks behind you until it's just a smudge on the horizon, and then it's gone. Ahead of you is nothing but an endless expanse of gray water and gray sky. The romance of sailing wears off within the first hour. The longship is a marvel of design, but it is not a comfortable ride. It's an open boat. There is no cabin, no shelter, no roof. When it rains, you get wet. When the waves crash over the side, you get soaked. The North Atlantic wind is a relentless, bone-chilling force that seems to cut right through your wool cloak. You huddle together with the other men for warmth. Your body's a miserable, damp heap. Then, there's the motion. The flexible hull that makes the ship so resilient also means it rides and twists with the waves. The ship is constantly rolling, pitching, and yawing. If you are prone to motion sickness, you are in for a world of misery. There is no private place to be sick. You just lean over the side, much to the disgust of the man sitting next to you. The floorboards are perpetually slick with a charming mixture of salt water, rainwater, and vomit. Your days fall into a monotonous, grueling routine. You are divided into watches. During your watch, you have jobs to do. You might be at the steering board, a task that requires immense concentration and strength to keep the ship on course. You might be on lookout at the prow, your eyes straining for any sign of land, other ships, or bad weather. You might be bailing water, a never-ending task, using wooden buckets to scoop out the water that constantly sloshes into the bilge. When the wind dies, the real work begins. The great sail is lowered, and the chieftain orders the oars out. The long, heavy oars are passed through the oar ports along the side of the ship. You take your position on the bench, and at the command, you begin to row. It's brutal, back-breaking labor. You pull, and pull, and pull, your muscles screaming, your hands blistering, your back aching. You have to row in perfect time with the other men. The rhythmic splash of the oars the only percussion to your shared agony. Food is as grim as the weather. There's no galley for cooking hot meals. You subsist on what you brought in your sea chest hard. Dry bread that's probably already going stale salted. Dried fish that you chew on like leather and maybe some sky, or cheese for the first few days before it goes bad. Your water is stored in leather bags or wooden casks, and it quickly takes on a foul, stagnant taste. It's a diet designed purely for survival, not for pleasure. Here's a small, practical detail of life at sea going to the bathroom. There's no designated toilet or head. You simply find a spot on the leeward side of the ship, the side the wind is blowing away from. Hang yourself over the edge, and hope for the best. It's precarious, undignified, and offers zero privacy. The psychological toll of the journey is as significant as the physical one. You are trapped in a small, crowded space with the same group of men for weeks on end. Tempers can flare. The lack of sleep, the constant discomfort, and the gnawing boredom can turn minor annoyances into major conflicts. A strong chieftain was essential, not just as a navigator, but as a manager of men, able to quash disputes and maintain morale. The academic debate about these voyages often revolves around the question of scale and organization. Were most raids small, opportunistic affairs with one or two ships, like the one you're on, or were they the massive, organized fleets described in some chronicles? The Great He, an army that descended upon England? The answer is likely both. Archaeology has uncovered evidence of small, raider-style encampments, but also massive winter bases that could have housed thousands of men. The Viking Age wasn't a single phenomenon, it was a series of different types of expeditions, evolving over time. Some historians argue that the early raids were small and exploratory, and only after their success did they scale up into full-blown invasions. Night falls, the temperature plummets, there's no fire for warmth. You try to sleep on your bench, your cloak pulled tight around you, your head resting on your sea chest. You are rocked by the endless motion of the sea, the spray misting your face. You sleep in short, fateful bursts, waking every time a larger wave hits the hull. You are cold, you are damp, you are sore, and you are very, very long way from the smoky warmth of the longhouse. The dream of glory and silver feels very distant right now. Your current dream is of a dry blanket and a piece of ground that doesn't move. After weeks at sea that have blurred into a single gray memory of cold and damp, the lookout scry finally comes land. You scramble to your feet, your stiff muscles protesting, and peer over the side. A dark line on the horizon slowly resolves into a green and brown coastline. It's England, or perhaps France. It's the land of opportunity. But as you get closer, the mood on the ship shifts. The weary boredom is replaced by a tense, nervous energy. The chieftain issues sharp orders. The sail is lowered. The oars are deployed for a silent approach into a secluded river mouth. The men around you are no longer just tired sailors. They are preparing for a fight. They check the edges of their axes. They tighten the leather straps on their simple round shields. And they quietly don their helmets, if they have them. You're given your equipment a wooden shield in despair. The shield is a large circle of wood, maybe an inch thick, with the central iron boss to protect your hand. It's heavy and awkward. The spear has a simple iron head and a long ashwood shaft. It's the primary weapon of the Viking warrior, far more common than the iconic axe or the expensive sword. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. All the stories told by the fire seem like a child's fantasy now. This is real. The ship grinds onto a gravelly beach. The command is given. You leap over the side into the shallow water, the shock of the cold taking your breath away. You and the 30 other men from your ship form up on the beach. You are not a wild, screaming horde. You are a small, disciplined unit. The veterans form the front rank, their shields overlapping to create a solid barrier of wooden iron. This is the SKJ IL de Borg, the shield wall. Your place is in the second rank, behind a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face. Your job is to add your weight to the wall, to push forward, and to use your long spear to stab over or through the gaps in the front rank. The idea is to present a solid, unified front, a human porcupine that is difficult to break. You march inland, towards the smoke you see rising in the distance. It's a small monastery or a wealthy farmstead. As you approach, you hear shouting. A local militia, a group of farmers and villagers hastily assembled, is coming to meet you. They are armed with a motley collection of farm implements, hunting spears, and a few old swords. They outnumber you, but you have the advantage of surprise, better equipment, and a cohesive, practiced tactic. The two groups meet. There is no heroic, one-on-one dueling like in the movies. There is only the brutal, claustrophobic reality of the shield wall. The two lines crash together with a sickening crunch of wood on wooden metal on bone. The air is filled with shouting, screaming, and the percussive thud of weapons hitting shields. It is a pushing match, a gruesome, human scrum. You push with all your might against the man in front of you, your spear held ready, your knuckles white. The press of bodies is immense. You can smell the sweat and fear of the men around you. The fight is not about elegant swordplay. It's about finding a small gap. An opponent's shield is raised to high, and a spear darts underneath. A man stumbles, and the wall behind him momentarily buckles. An axe hook reaches over a shield and pulls it down, exposing the man for a fatal blow. It's ugly, chaotic, and exhausting. It's a contest of stamina and nerve. Here's a small, gruesome detail about the fighting the axe. The famous Danish long axe was a terrifying weapon. With its long handle, a strong man could put his entire body weight into a swing, cleaving through a shield and the man behind it. But even the smaller hand axes were devastating. The psychological impact of seeing what an axe could do to a human body was a weapon in itself. One of the great historical debates surrounding Viking combat is the role of the berserkers. The sagas describe these elite warriors who would fight in a trance-like fury, supposedly immune to pain, biting their shields and howling like wild animals. Were they real, and if so, what was the source of their frenzy? Some theories suggest they used hallucinogenic mushrooms, like Amanita muscaria, to induce their rage. Other scholars propose it was a form of self-induced hysteria, a psychological state achieved through pre-battle rituals. A more recent and pragmatic theory suggests the berserker rage might have been a performance, an act of psychological warfare to terrify their opponents before the battle even began. Or perhaps it was simply a literary trope to describe exceptionally fierce warriors. The true nature of the berserker remains a mystery. The enemy line finally breaks. They turn and run. There is no chivalry here. Your group pursues them, cutting down those who are too slow. The battle is over in minutes. It was not a glorious affair. It was a brutal, efficient, and terrifying piece of work. You stand there, leaning on your spear, your body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Your ears are ringing. You look around. A few of your own crew are down, being tended to by their comrades. The cost of victory is always paid in blood. You have survived your first fight, but there is no feeling of triumph. Only a hollow ache and the grim realization that the stories leave out the worst parts, the noise, the smell, the sheer, impersonal brutality of it all. This is the reality of the Viking raid. It's not about honor or glory. It's a violent, terrifying business venture. The fight is over. The defenders are scattered, and a tense quiet falls over the raided settlement. The adrenaline that fueled you during the combat drains away, leaving you feeling shaky and strangely detached. Now comes the second part of the operation. The entire reason you crossed the Grey Sea and risked your life in a shield wall to plunder. You and your crew move through the small monastery. There is no grand treasure vault filled with glittering gold coins and overflowing chests of jewels. The image of Vikings finding a dragon's hoard is largely a fantasy, a confusion with the epic poems of heroes like Beowulf. The reality of the loot is far more mundane, yet just as valuable to the men who came to get it. Your chieftain directs the search with a practiced eye. He knows what to look for. He walks into the small chapel and drips the silver plates and carved ivory panels off the cover of a large, beautifully illustrated Bible. The book itself, a masterpiece of monastic calligraphy, is tossed aside as worthless. It's the precious materials HES after. He prized the gemstones from a silver chalice used for communion. These items are not sacred objects to him. They are simply raw material, easily convertible hack silver once he gets them home. You are put to work rounding up the real prize, the most valuable commodity that this place has to offer livestock. You chase after squawking chickens and wrestle stubborn goats. A couple of men are struggling to lead a cow, the settlement's most significant single hazard, down towards the beach. Another group is systematically emptying the granary, hauling heavy sacks of wheat and barley. This is the boring, unglamorous truth of the spoils of war. You came all this way not for a chest of gold, but for someone else's food supply, for a society that lives on the edge of subsistence. Controlling the food source is the ultimate form of wealth. Then there is the third category of loot, the one that is often sanitized or ignored in popular depictions, but was a grim and central part of the Viking economy. People, the monks who weren't killed in the fighting, the local women, the children. They are rounded up, their hands bound. They are terrified, confused, and weeping. To you and your crew, they are not seen as fellow human beings. They are thralls, slaves. They are another form of livestock, another commodity to be taken, used, or sold. The process is swift and ruthless. You have to be quick. The local lord will have been alerted, and the larger, more professional fighting force could be on its way. You have a very short window to strip the settlement of everything of value and get back to the safety of your ship. A small, peculiar type of loot that was highly prized fine clothing. A beautifully embroidered cloak or a tunic made from high-quality, imported cloth, what they called silk. I was an incredible stat, a symbol back home. It was light, portable, and a very visible way to show off the success of your voyage. Archaeological digs in Scandinavia have found fragments of silks from as far away as Byzantium and Persia. almost certainly acquired through this mix of raiding and trading. The division of the spoils is a critical and potentially contentious moment. How was it all divided up? This is a question historians have puzzled over. There was no single, universal system. In most cases, the chieftain or expedition leader would get the largest share, perhaps a full tenth, plus first pick of the best items. The rest would be divided among the crew. A simple system would be for each man to get one equal share. However, some evidence from the sagas suggests a more complex hierarchy. An experienced warrior, a ship's master, or someone who owned a share in the ship itself might receive a larger portion than a young, inexperienced rower like you. The goal was to have a system that was seen as fair enough to prevent infighting, which could tear a crew apart. The promise of a fair share of the loot was the glue that held the warband together. The debate among scholars often focuses on the economic impact of this plunder. Was the influx of silver from places like England and Francia the primary engine of the Scandinavian economy during this period, or was it a bonus? With the domestic economy of farming and crafting still being the fundamental driver, the vast number of silver hoards found in Scandinavia, filled with foreign coins, certainly points to the massive scale of this wealth transfer. However, some economic historians argue that this focus on plunder oversells the glamour and undersells the foundational importance of trade in items like furs, ivory, and whetstones, which may have created a more stable, long-term economic base. The Viking economy was likely a complex mix of both. You carry a heavy sack of grain down to the ship, the coarse burlap scratching your shoulder. You dump it in the hull alongside the others. The ship is slowly filling with a strange collection of goods, church silver, sacks of grain, squawking poultry, and a huddle of terrified human captives. This is your treasure. It doesn't glitter. It smells of high-end fear. You look at the pile of mismatched, mundane, and brutally acquired goods, and you realize that building a fortune in the Viking Age is a messy, ugly business. It's not the heroic acquisition of treasure, it's the violent, systematic dismantling of someone else's life. The journey back is different. The mood is lighter, buoyed by the success of the raid, but the physical reality is worse. The longship is now dangerously overloaded. The hull sits low in the water, crowded with sacks of grain, nervous livestock, and the most valuable and volatile cargo of all the thralls. You are crammed shoulder to shoulder, not just with your crewmates, but with the dozen or so captives you took from the monastery. They are huddled together in the center of the ship, bound and miserable. They don't speak your language. Their eyes are wide with terror and grief. They are the human face of your plunder, a constant, silent accusation in the middle of your vessel. Where did these thralls come from? Many, like the ones on your ship, were captured in raids across Europe from England, Ireland, Francia, and the Slavic clans of the East. The Irish city of Dublin, founded by Vikings, became one of the largest slave markets in all of Western Europe. But not all thralls were foreigners. You could also be born into slavery if your mother was a thrall. Or, a free Norseman could be enslaved for committing certain crimes or for being unable to pay a debt. The life of a thrall was one of unceasing, brutal labor. On the farmstead you left, the hardest, dirtiest, and most dangerous jobs were reserved for them. They were the ones grinding the grain for hours on the heavy quernstone, mucking out the animal stalls, digging peat from the box, and serving the household at all hours. Their diet was meager, their clothing was rags, and their living quarters were likely just a space on the floor in the coldest part of the longhouse. The fate of the captives on your ship is uncertain. Some of the women might be kept by the chieftain or his warriors as concubines, their children destined to be born into slavery. Some of the men with useful skills, a blacksmith, a carpenter, might be kept for their labor, but most are destined for the market. Here's a small, chilling detail about the trade. The value of a thrall varied. The young, strong male in his prime was worth a good price. A young female was often worth even more. Due to her potential for both labor and reproduction, Children and older people were worth less. There are records from other cultures, like the detailed accounts of Arab merchants, that describe these slave markets, where human beings were inspected like livestock, their teeth checked, their bodies prodded, before a price was haggled over. The full extent and nature of slavery in Viking society is a topic of intense and difficult scholarly research. One of the major debates is about social mobility. Was it possible for a thrall to become free? The law codes do mention a process for freeing a slave, or less in GI. An owner could grant a thrall their freedom, or a thrall could theoretically purchase their own freedom if they somehow managed to acquire wealth. However, even a freedman was not equal. They occupied a social class somewhere between a slave and a free farmer, with fewer rights and a lower WE, are guild the compensation note if they were killed. How often this actually happened is unknown. For the vast majority, thraldom was a life sentence, and a hereditary one at that. Another debate centers on the numbers. How much of the population was enslaved? It's impossible to know for sure, as thralls don't often show up in the archaeological record in a distinct way. Some estimates, based on textual sources and comparisons with other slave-owning societies, suggest that thralls could have made up as much as a quarter of the population in some areas. If true, it means the entire lifestyle of the free farmers and warriors you've witnessed was built on the forced labor of a massive, oppressed underclass. You look at the face of a young captive, a boy no older than 10, who was staring blankly at the gray waves. He was probably a novice in the monastery, learning to read and write. No, his future is a black void. He will be taken to a strange, cold land where he doesn't speak the language, and he will spend the rest of his life in brutal servitude, his name and his past erased. The small pile of silver you've been promised for your part in the raid suddenly feels tainted. It is the proceeds from a venture that didn't just steal grain and metal, but stole lives. You are a part of this system now, the prosperity of your world. The very freedom that allows a man to go a Viking is paid for by the bondage of others. It's a dark and troubling foundation, and it's a truth that the heroic sagas rarely, if ever, choose to dwell on. The ship finally makes landfall, not back at your small home fjord, but at a bustling, chaotic, and unbelievably noisy settlement. It's a place like Hedeby in Denmark or Burka in Sweden. This isn't a farm, it's a town, a sprawling marketplace that is one of the great nexus of the Viking world. The air is thick with 1,000 smells: roasting meat, foreign spices, unwashed bodies, and the tang of the salt marsh it's built on. You hear a dozen languages you don't recognize. Your small raid was just one tributary feeding into this massive, flowing river of commerce. Here, the different facets of the Viking identity converge. The warrior who was just your crewmate is now haggling with a merchant over the price of the stolen church silver. The trader who might have been on another ship is laying out his wares: glossy black furs from the deep forests of the north, blocks of soapstone carved into cooking pots, and walrus tusks, the ivory of the Norse, prized all over Europe and the Middle East. This is where you truly understand that the Vikings were not isolated barbarians. They were key players in a globalized economy, the ultimate middlemen connecting disparate worlds. They created undominated a vast trade network that stretched from the icy shores of Greenland in the west, down the great rivers of Russia to the glittering cities of Constantinople and Baghdad in the east. You watch as a merchant from your ship finalizes a deal. The stolen English silver and the captive thralls are sold to a trader with a long, dark beard and clothes that look strangely foreign. In exchange, he doesn't receive local goods. He receives a pouch full of silver dirhams, coins minted in Samarkand or Baghdad. Their elegant Arabic script a testament to a journey of thousands of miles. This Arab silver, traded for English slaves, will now be taken back to Norway to buy land or build a new longship. It's a dizzying, world-spanning transaction happening in a muddy marketplace in Scandinavia. You wander through the market, a sensory overload. You see a craftsman selling delicate glass beads. using techniques and styles learned from the Rhineland. You see a woman buying a comb made of reindeer antler, an item that could only have come from the Sami people of the far north. You see a wealthy chieftain wearing a ring with an amethyst stone that was probably mined in the Ural Mountains, and on his finger is another ring with an inscription that reads, "For Allah," an item that has traveled through many hands and cultures, its original meaning likely lost, now worn simply as an exotic status symbol. This trade network wasn't just about luxury goods, it was also about raw materials. Norway exported whetstone as from its unique quarries. Sweden exported high-quality iron. The forests of Russia, controlled by the Rus Vikings, provided a seemingly endless supply of furs, sable, marten, and fox that were in high demand in the courts of Byzantium and the Caliphates, where they were a sign of immense wealth. Here's a small, surprising detail about this network: a Buddha statue in a Viking grave. On the island of Helgo in Sweden, archaeologists excavating a Viking Age workshop found a small bronze Buddha statue originating from the Kashmir region of northern India, dating to around the 6th century. How did it get there? It likely traveled up the Silk Road, was traded to merchants in the Middle East, then moved up the Russian river systems, passing through countless hands before ending up in a workshop in the middle of a Swedish lake, thousands of miles and hundreds of years from its origin. It's a single object that perfectly encapsulates the incredible reach of their network. The nature and structure of these long-distance trade routes are a source of constant scholarly fascination. The eastern route, the Osterviegr, is particularly debated. How much of it was trade and how much was extortion and conquest? The Rus Vikings, who established themselves along the Dnieper and Volga rivers, acted as both rulers and merchants. They extracted tribute slaves, furs, honey from the local Slavic populations, and then transported these goods downriver to sell. Were they colonizers, a ruling elite, or just exceptionally organized traders? The line is blurry, and it was likely a combination of all three. Historians argue whether the Vikings were the catalyst for the formation of the first Russian state, the Kievan Rus, or if they simply inserted themselves into a process that was already underway. You see the young man from your farmstead, the one who was so eager to go on his first raid. He has his share of the silver, a small but significant pile of chopped-up coins and jewelry. He is staring at it in his palm, the physical proof of his success. But here, in this vast, international marketplace, his small victory seems almost insignificant. He is a tiny cog in a giant, complex machine, a machine that is powered by the violent acquisition of plunder in the West, and the complex, often equally exploitative, extraction of resources in the East. You realize the Viking Age is not a simple story of farmers who go raiding. It's a story of a people who, through a unique combination of maritime skill, opportunism, and violence, managed to place themselves at the very heart of the world's flow of goods and wealth. They were the bridge between worlds, and this noisy, muddy, vibrant town is where all those worlds met. You've made it back to your home farmstead. The voyage is a distant memory. Your small share of the silver is safely tucked away. Then the familiar rhythm of agricultural life has resumed. But the year is turning. The days are growing noticeably shorter. The air has a permanent chill, and the leaves on a few deciduous trees have turned to brilliant, fleeting shades of yellow and red before falling. The harvest is in. The animals are being brought in from their summer pastures, and a sense of urgency hangs in the air. Winter is coming. For a modern person, winter means cozy sweaters, hot chocolate, and holidays. For a Viking, winter is the great enemy. It's a long, dark, and dangerous season of confinement, scarcity, and psychological strain. Your survival for the next 4 to 5 months depends entirely on the preparations you make now. The longhouse, which felt so crowded and stuffy in the summer, now feels like a sanctuary. The walls are re-insulated with fresh turf, and any gaps are plugged with moss and mud to keep out the howling wind. The central fire, which was allowed to die down during the summer days, will now be kept burning constantly, day and night. The smoke hole in the roof will be partially covered, a delicate balance between letting smoke out and keeping precious heat in. The air inside will become thick and heavy, a permanent twilight haze. Your days of outdoor labor are over. The ground is frozen solid, covered in a blanket of snow. The work moves indoors. The men will spend their days mending tools, carving wood, and repairing their leather gear. The women will be at their looms. The rhythmic clacking of the weaving weights, a constant sound in the dim light. The main task for everyone is simply to conserve energy, to make the resources last. The food supply, which seemed so abundant after the harvest, is now carefully rationed by the HUS Freja. The evening meal is the main event of the day, a brief period of warmth and community. But the menu is grimly monotonous. You'll eat dried, salted fish until you're sick of the sight of it. You'll have flatbread made from the precious store of grain. You'll eat porridge, always porridge. Fresh meat is a rare luxury, reserved for a midwinter feast where an animal might be slaughtered. Every scrap is used. The blood is made into sausage. The intestines are cleaned for casings, and the bones are boiled for broth. Nothing is wasted. As the weeks stretch into months, the darkness becomes a physical presence in the heart of a Scandinavian winter. You might only get a few hours of weak, gray daylight. The rest of the time is spent in the near-total darkness of the longhouse, relieved only by the glow of the central fire. This lack of sunlight has a profound psychological effect. Modern doctors call it seasonal affective disorder SAD. The Vikings just called it winter. The sagas are filled with descriptions of skamdegii, the short days, and the deep melancholy that could settle over a household, leading to depression and short tempers. Here's a small, poignant detail of winter life: the importance of ice. While the frozen landscape was a barrier, it could also be a bridge. A fjord that was a wide expanse of water in the summer was now a solid highway of ice. People could travel on skates made from polished animal bones, strapped to their shoes to visit neighboring farms, trade goods, or attend feasts. The ice transformed the geography, creating new connections in the dead of winter. But the winter also brought unique dangers. The major one was fire, with the central hearth burning constantly and the longhouse full of dried imbrant straw. A stray spark could be catastrophic. The other great danger was starvation. If the harvest was poor, or if the winter lasted longer than expected, the food stores could run out. The final, desperate weeks of winter, just before the spring thaw, were known as the Hunger Gap. This was the time when families faced the heartbreaking choice of slaughtering their breeding animals or starving themselves. The historical understanding of the Viking winter is a topic of ongoing research. One area of debate is the scale of their winter feasts. Like Yule, the sagas portray them as huge, multi-day parties with excessive drinking and feasting. But how common was this for the average farmer? Some historians argue these grand feasts were likely the purview of wealthy chieftains who could afford to slaughter multiple animals and had large stores of ale and mead. For a regular farmstead, the midwinter festival might have been a much more modest affair. A single precious meal of fresh meat and a brief respite from the daily grind of survival. It was less about a wild party and more about a ritual to mark the turning of the year, a plea for the sun to return. Use it by the fire, carving a piece of wood into a spoon. Your world has shrunk to the size of this smoky, crowded room. The epic voyages and the bustling markets of summer feel like a dream. This is the other half of the Viking reality. It's not about action and adventure, it's about endurance. It's a slow, quiet, and deeply challenging test of patience and resilience. You are simply waiting for the light to return, waiting for the world to thaw, waiting to survive until spring. The long winter has finally broken. You survived, but not everyone did. An old man, weakened by the months of cold and meager food, passed away quietly in his sleep. Now, the community must attend to the final, most important ritual of all, his funeral. How a person is treated in death reveals more about a culture's beliefs than almost anything else. and the Norse way is a complex tapestry of respect, ritual, and deeply held beliefs about the afterlife. The first thing you notice is that there is no single, standard way to do this. Funerary customs in the Viking Age varied dramatically by region, by time period, and by the social status of the deceased. The two main methods were cremation and inhumation burial, and for a time, they existed side by side. In this case, the community has decided on cremation, an older, pagan tradition. The old man's body is washed and dressed in his finest remaining clothes. He is laid out on a specially constructed wooden pyre, which has been built in a prominent place with a view of the water. This isn't just about disposing of a body, it's a public performance, a final act of honor for the departed. As family and friends gather, they bring grave goods. These are objects to accompany the dead on their journey to the afterlife. A warrior might be buried with his sword and shield, a craftsman with his tools, a HUS freighter with her keys and weaving implements. For this old farmer, the offerings are simple but poignant: his favorite carving knife, a clay cup, and a small portion of grain. The idea is that he will need these things in the next world. The chieftain says a few words, not a prayer, but a eulogy, recounting the man's life, his deeds, and his character. Then, a torch is set to the pyre. The flames roar to life, consuming the wood and the body in a torrent of heat and smoke. It's a dramatic, powerful, and slightly unsettling sight. The fire is seen as a transformative element, releasing the spirit from the body and sending it on its way. But where is it going? This is where things get complicated. The popular modern idea is that all brave Vikings go to Valhalla, but that's a significant oversimplification. Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, was a very exclusive club. It was Odin's personal war band in Asgard, and only warriors who died a valiant death in battle could be chosen by the Valkyrs to go there. Their afterlife would be an endless cycle of feasting on a perpetually regenerating boar and fighting each other to the death every day, only to be resurrected each evening to do it all again. It was a warrior's paradise, designed to create an elite army for Odin to use at Ragnarok. So, where did everyone else go? Most people, like the old man on the pyre, were destined for a different realm. The most common destination was Hel, or Helheim, ruled by the goddess of the same name, Loki's daughter. Hell was not the fiery pit of punishment of Christian tradition. It was a cold, musty, gloomy underworld. It wasn't a place of torment, but it wasn't a paradise either. It was a shadowy, dreary continuation of existence. You went there if you died of old age, sickness, or any other non-combat cause. It was the default afterlife for the 99%. And there were other options, too. Some believed that the dead continued to live on in their burial mound. The Holgar, the grave, was seen as their new home, and the family would sometimes leave offerings of food and drink at the mound, as if they were still part of the community. A particularly powerful individual might become a Drive August star, a sort of undead zombie who would jealously guard their grave goods and could terrorize the local community. Here's a small, weird detail about funerals: ritual killing. In the accounts of some very high-status funerals, like that of a Rus chieftain on the Volga witnessed by Ibn Fadlan, the ceremony included human sacrifice. A thrall girl would volunteer to be killed to accompany her master into the afterlife. This horrific practice, which also involved complex rituals and intoxication, was likely very rare and reserved only for the most powerful leaders. But it highlights the extreme lengths they would go to in order to equip the dead for the next world. The academic debate about Norse eschatology, the study of death and the afterlife, is intense. How much of our understanding of Valhalla, Hell, and the other realms is authentic pre-Christian belief, and how much has been colored or reinterpreted by the Christian scribes, like Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the stories down centuries later. Snorri was trying to make sense of the old myths for a Christian audience, and he may have organized them into a more coherent system than ever actually existed. Some scholars argue that the pre-Christian beliefs were likely much more fluid, varied, and localized, with no single, universally accepted map of the afterlife. The idea of a clear choice between Valhalla for the cool kids and hell for everyone else might be a later simplification of a much messier reality. The pyre has burned down to embers. The community will gather the remaining bone fragments and the melted metal from the grave goods and place them in a ceramic urn. This urn will then be buried under a small mound of earth, the slumber, which will serve as a permanent memorial on the landscape. You look at the small mound. It's a final, quiet statement. The old man's life wasn't one of epic battles or glorious death. It was a life of hard work, of quiet endurance, of raising a family and tending the land. His reward is not a seat in Odin's mead hall. His fate lies in the grey mists of hell or in the silent earth of his own mound. It's a somber, pragmatic, and perhaps more realistic view of the final journey. Years pass. You are no longer the newcomer, the disoriented traveler. You are a part of the farmstead's rhythm. You have survived raids, winters, and sickness. You have seen births and funerals. The world feels permanent, cyclical, unchanging, but it is changing, slowly and then all at once, in a way that is more profound than any seasonal shift. A new story is being told, a story that is competing with the tales of Odin and Thor. It arrives not on a longship with warriors, but in the form of a lone man in a simple brown robe. He is a Christian missionary. He doesn't carry an axe, but a wooden cross. He speaks of a single, all-powerful God, a God of love and forgiveness, not of war and cunning. He speaks of a heaven open to all who believe, not just to warriors. He speaks of sin and salvation, concepts that are alien to the Norse way of thinking. At first, he is met with suspicion and ridicule. His message of turn the other cheek seems weak and foolish in a society built on honor and retribution. His God seems distant and abstract compared to the tangible, flawed, and very human gods of Asgard. But the missionary is persistent, and his ideas begin to take root, not through theological debate, but through practical demonstration. The local chieftain, a pragmatic and ambitious man, sees the potential advantages of this new faith. The Christian kings of Europe and England, in Francia, are powerful and wealthy. Their kingdoms are more centralized, more organized. Adopting their religion is a way to be taken more seriously on the international stage, to forge alliances, and to facilitate trade. The cross is becoming a symbol not just of faith, but of a new, modern, and more effective way of organizing a kingdom. The chieftain agrees to be baptized, and his household, including you, is expected to follow suit. The transition is awkward and incomplete. A priest might build a small wooden church on the hill, but for a long time, it stands near the old sacred grove. People might wear a small silver cross around their neck, but they wear it right next to a silver Thor's hammer amulet. It's a period of religious hedging, of covering all your bases. You might pray to Christ for salvation, but still leave an offering for Thor before a sea voyage, just in case. This blending of beliefs is visible in the ardent artifacts of the time. The Jelling Stone in Denmark, raised by King Harald Bluetooth, is a perfect example. One side features a magnificent carving of a rampant lion and serpent, classic Norse imagery. The other side features the earliest known depiction of Christ in Scandinavia. The runic inscription proudly proclaims that Harald made the Danes Christian. It is a monument that stands with one foot in the old world and one in the new. You witness the slow erosion of the old ways. The local thing loses some of its authority as the king, supported by the church, begins to issue his own laws. The concept of double-year guild, the blood price, is gradually replaced by the idea of crime as an offense against God and the king, to be punished by the state, not compensated between families. The old stories of the gods are still told by the fire, but now they are framed as foolish fables of the ignorant past. Here's a small, fascinating detail of this transition: the conversion of Thor. As Christianity spread, the figure of Christ had to compete with the most popular and beloved of the Norse gods, Thor. In some areas, Christ took on Thor-like attributes. He was portrayed not just as a gentle savior, but as a powerful, warrior-like figure who did battle with the demons of the old religion. The cross became a weapon, a symbol of spiritual power that could defeat the old magic, much like Thor's hammer defeated the giants. The end of the Viking Age is a subject of endless scholarly discussion. There is no single date, no final battle that marks its conclusion. Instead, it was a slow fading, a gradual transformation. What caused it to end the taming of the Vikings through Christian conversion is a huge part of the story. The new religion brought with it a different set of ethics and integrated Scandinavia into the mainstream of European Christendom. But other factors were just as important. The nations of Europe became better at defending themselves. They built castles, organized armies, and learned how to fight back. The soft targets that had made raiding so profitable were disappearing. At the same time, the kingdoms within Scandinavia itself were becoming more centralized and European. The kings preferred to tax their own people rather than let their unruly warriors go abroad to plunder. The energy that had once exploded outwards in raids was now being turned inwards, towards state building. Historians debate which of these factors was the primary driver. Was it a change of heart religion, or a change in economics and military reality? Were they tamed from within? Or were they simply defeated from without? The most likely answer is that it was a feedback loop. Christianization helped centralize the states, and more centralized states were better able to both suppress the old raiding lifestyle and defend themselves against outsiders. The Viking way of life didn't so much end as it evolved into something new. The medieval kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. You stand by the old burial mound of the farmer who died so many years ago. It is now overgrown with weeds. A few hundred yards away, the new church cemetery has neat rows of graves, all facing east, awaiting a final judgment that the man in the mound would never have understood. The world you entered is gone. The longships are being replaced by heavier, deeper trading cogs. The warrior farmer is becoming just a farmer. The age of the Viking, that chaotic, violent, and dynamic period of history, is drawing to a quiet close. You are old now. Your hair is the color of snow on a winter branch, and your hands are gnarled like the roots of an ancient oak. Your face is a road map of the life you have lived, etched with the lines of laughter, worry, and long days under a northern sun. You sit on a bench outside the longhouse, now more of a proper timber farmhouse, and watch the children playing in the yard. They are the grandchildren of the people you once knew as children. Your life did not end in a glorious battle, earning you a seat in Valhalla. It did not end in the grey mists of hell after a wasting sickness. It just continued, day by day, season by season, year by year. You are one of the lucky ones, one of the survivors who has been granted the strange and unexpected gift of old age. You look back, and the past unspools in your mind not as a grand, coherent narrative, but as a series of disjointed, sensory memories. You remember the acrid smell of smoke in that first longhouse, a smell that meant both home and suffocation. You can almost taste the gritty, bland porridge, and the sharp, sour tang of skyr that made it bearable. You feel the phantom itch of the coarse wool to nick on your skin, and the damp, bone-deep cold of a night at sea on an open long ship. You remember the terror of the shield wall, the deafening noise, the press of bodies, and the surprising weight of the spear in your hand. You remember the sight of the English monastery against a grey sky, and the hollow feeling in your stomach as you loaded the sacks of stolen grain onto the boat. You recall the dizzying chaos of the trading town, the babble of foreign tongues, and the glint of Arabic silver in a merchant's palm. You think of the endless, back-breaking labor in the fields, the churning of the soil, the weeding, the harvesting, You realize that for every one day of adventure, there were 1,000 days of this. The true story of your life was not the raid, it was the farm. The rhythm of your existence was dictated by the barley and the cow, not the longship and the axe. This is the great, boring truth that the Skalds in their epic stories always leave out. The foundation of that explosive age was quiet, repetitive, agricultural toil. You've witnessed a world transform. The old gods, who once felt so present and powerful, now feel like distant figures from a half-forgotten dream. The children playing in the yard know the name of Jesus Christ far better than they know the name of Freyr. They see the cross as a symbol of hope, and the Thur's hammer amulet you still keep in a pouch as a curious relic of a savage past. You have seen the very meaning of things change. This silver you helped plunder, once a symbol of a successful ride and personal prowess, is now just currency, part of a taxable economy controlled by a king you've never met. The honor that was once settled in a bloody home, gang, or a shouting match at the local thing is now subject to the written laws of the kingdom and the judgment of a priest. Here's one final, small detail that encapsulates the life you've lived. You look at your own hands. The skin is rough, calloused from a lifetime of work, but your fingernails are clean. You have, throughout your long life, maintained the habit of regular grooming. You still own a comb, carved from the antler of a deer you hunted decades ago. It is your last, personal link to that strange pride of the old Norse culture, the belief that even in a harsh and oft unfilthy world, a person could maintain a small measure of order and self-respect through simple, daily acts of care. The grand academic question that looms over your entire existence is, why did the Viking Age happen? And as you sit here, at the end of it all, you don't have a simple answer. It was just one thing. It was a perfect storm of land hunger, political ambition, technological innovation, and sheer, audacious opportunism. It was the energy of a people on the edge of the known world, suddenly realizing they had the tools to break out and reshape it. Your life has been a strange paradox. It has been filled with more hardship, boredom, and discomfort than any modern person could easily endure. You have lived without comfort, without privacy, without the security of modern medicine or law. And yet, it has not been a life without meaning. There was meaning in the harvest, in the raising of a family, in the honoring of your ancestors, and in the quiet satisfaction of surviving another winter. It was a life lived on a human scale, bound to the earth, the seasons, and the small community that was your entire world. As the evening sun casts long shadows across the yard, you close your eyes, the memories fading into a gentle, quiet peace. The world around you begins to soften. The sharp edges of memory, the cold of the sea, the heat of the fire, they all start to blur, blending into one another like watercolors on a damp page. The sounds of the farmstead, the distant laughter of children, the lowing of cattle, all fade into a gentle, rhythmic hum, like the soft whirring of the fan in your room. You feel yourself drifting now. No longer an observer on a hard wooden bench, but a traveler on a much quieter sea. The scratchy wool blanket you've worn for a lifetime feels impossibly soft, impossibly light. The smoky air of the longhouse is gone, replaced by the clean, cool air of your own familiar space. You are no longer in that time, that place of struggle and endurance. You are returning, slowly, gently, to the here and now. The journey is over. The stories have been told. The fields are quiet. The seas are calm. And the longhouse is finally, deeply asleep. Let the current of your breath guide you now. Each gentle rise and fall wave carrying you further into the peaceful depths of slumber. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to see. There is only rest. The end of the article. Good night.